Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I noticed it because it didn't match the rest of the sky. I'd driven out past the last bit of town, out toward a stretch of open land where there's nothing but low grass and a few dirt tracks. I go there sometimes when I can't sleep. It's darker than anywhere near the houses, and you can actually see the stars properly. My name's Callum. I'd been out there maybe 20 minutes already, leaning against the side of my car, just looking up. It was cold but clear. No clouds, no wind, just that quiet you only get when you're far enough away from everything. The stars were sharp that night. That's the only way I can put it. They looked closer than usual, more defined. I'd been following one particular patch of sky, not for any reason, just something to focus on. There was a bright star near the edge of a small cluster, easy to pick out. I kept my eyes on it for a while. Then it dimmed, not completely, just slightly, like something had passed in front of it. It didn't blink or flicker, it just reduced in brightness for maybe half a second. Then it returned to normal. I stayed focused on it, waiting to see if it would happen again. At first, I thought maybe my eyes had shifted or something had passed in my line of sight. But I hadn't moved. I tested it, looked slightly to the left, then back. The star stayed consistent. I shifted my stance, leaned differently against the car. Still the same. Then it happened again. This time I was ready for it. The star dimmed. Same amount, same duration. Then it came back. I felt that small, uneasy kind of curiosity kick in. Not fear, just something wasn't lining up. I looked around the rest of the sky. Other stars were steady, no planes crossing, no satellites that I could see. Everything else was normal. I went back to that same star, focused on it again. A minute passed, then it dimmed again. This time I noticed something else. It wasn't just the star itself. A very small area around it seemed to shift slightly, like the darkness around it thickened for that moment. Then it snapped back. I pushed off from the car and stood upright, staring directly at it, trying to keep my eyes locked. It's harder than it sounds. Your vision drifts slightly without you realizing it. I kept correcting, trying to hold that exact point. Then it happened again, but this time it lasted longer, maybe a full second. The star dimmed, and that faint shift in the surrounding darkness was clearer, like something thin and transparent had moved across it, not blocking it completely, just reducing the light. I looked for movement after it passed. There was none. Nothing trailing away, nothing continuing across the sky, just that one moment. Then normal again. I felt a chill then, but not from the cold. More like a realization. Whatever was causing it wasn't moving across the sky in a visible way, at least not like anything I recognized. I glanced down for a second, rubbed my eyes, then looked back up. Tried to find the same star again. It took me a moment. Everything looked slightly different when I came back to it. But I found it. Still there, still bright. I waited. Nothing happened for a while. Then just as I was about to give up on it, it dimmed again. Same pattern, same duration. But this time I caught something at the edge of it. Not a shape exactly. More like a slight distortion, as if the space around that point wasn't behaving normally. I stepped away from the car completely now. Moved a few paces into the open. I don't know why. Maybe I thought the angle mattered. I looked back up. The star was still there, bright, unchanged. I waited again. This time I noticed something else. The silence. It wasn't total silence, but it felt deeper than before, like the usual background noise had dropped slightly. I couldn't hear the distant road anymore. Even the faint rustle of grass seemed gone. Then the star dimmed again, and this time I was certain something had passed in front of it. Not a solid object, not something I could see directly, but something was there. Something that only became noticeable because of how it affected the light behind it. I tried to follow it. My eyes moved slightly to where I thought it might have gone. But there was nothing, no continuation, no path. It was like it only existed at that exact point for that exact moment. Then it was gone. I stood there for a while longer, watching, waiting for it to happen again, but it didn't. The star stayed steady. The rest of the sky stayed normal. After a few minutes, the usual sounds came back. faint wind, distant hum of something far off. Everything settled. I got back into the car eventually, sat there for a bit before starting the engine. As I pulled away, I glanced up once more through the windshield. The stars looked the same as always, but I kept thinking about how whatever passed in front of that one didn't seem to travel across the sky. It just intersected that point for a moment and then wasn't there anymore. I only noticed it because the dog reacted before I did. It was early evening, not fully dark yet. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a mug, when Milo started barking at the back door. Not his usual bark either. Short, sharp, like he'd seen something he didn't understand. I wiped my hands and went over, thinking maybe a fox had come through the garden. That happens sometimes, but when I looked out, everything was still. My name's Nathan. I live in a semi-detached place with a small fenced yard out back. Nothing special, just a bit of grass and a shed. The camera is mounted above the back door, angled down so it covers most of the yard. I opened the door and stepped outside. Cold air, no wind. The garden was empty. Milo stayed inside, standing just behind me, still tense, not coming out like he usually does. I scanned the fence line, the corners, the shed. Nothing. After a minute, I went back in and shut the door. Milo settled a bit, but kept glancing toward the back like he was expecting something. I didn't think much of it at the time. Later that night, I was on the sofa, half watching TV, half scrolling on my phone, when I remembered the barking. Figured I'd check the camera footage just to see if anything had triggered him. I pulled it up on my phone. The camera records continuously, so I scrubbed back to around the time he'd started barking. There was nothing unusual at first. Just the usual empty yard, fading daylight, a bit of shadow shifting as the sun went down. Then I saw it. Not something in the yard. The whole image. It shifted. Just slightly, like the frame had slipped. Everything moved a fraction to the side, then snapped back. It was quick, less than a second. I replayed it, slowed it down. It wasn't the camera physically moving. The edges of the frame stayed the same. It was the content inside it, like the scene itself had shifted. I felt that small, uneasy kind of curiosity again, the kind that makes you keep watching even when nothing makes sense. I checked the timestamp. That's when I noticed it. It jumped. 1 second, it was 1942:16. Then after the shift, it was 9:42:23. 7 seconds gone. Just missing. No gap in the footage, no break, just a jump forward. I replayed it again. Same thing. Smooth footage, then the shift, then the time skip. I checked earlier in the recording. Everything else was normal, seconds ticking forward evenly. No glitches, no skips. I scrubbed through later parts too. Still normal. Just that one moment. I sat there for a bit, trying to figure out what could cause something like that. Maybe a glitch in the system, a buffering issue, but the video didn't stutter or freeze. It was continuous, except for that one shift. I got up and went to the back door again. Opened it, stepped outside. It was fully dark now. The yard looked exactly as it had earlier. Still, quiet. I looked up at where the camera was mounted. It hadn't moved. No loose fittings. No sign of anything interfering with it. I went back inside and checked the footage again. This time I paid attention to the details around the shift. The fence, the shed, the grass. Right before it happened, everything looked normal. Then during that brief moment, everything seemed slightly misaligned. Like the perspective had shifted just a fraction. Then it snapped back. I noticed something else too. During the shift, the shadows didn't behave normally. They didn't stretch or move naturally with the rest of the image. They lagged slightly, just for that moment. Then they caught up. I replayed it over and over. Each time, the same thing, the same shift, the same time jump, the same slight delay in the shadows. I checked the rest of the system. No errors, no notifications. Everything else had recorded normally. I even checked the front camera. Nothing unusual there. Just the back one. Just that moment. I thought about what Milo had done. The way he'd barked, the way he hadn't wanted to go outside. I tried to match the exact time of his reaction with the footage. It lined up, right around that shift. I turned the sound on for the recording. Usually it doesn't pick up much, just faint ambient noise, wind, distant cars. At the moment of the shift, there was nothing. Not silence exactly, just absence. Like the background noise dropped out completely for that fraction of a second. Then it came back. I leaned back on the sofa, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. A glitch could explain the video, maybe even the timestamp, but not the way the image behaved, not the way the shadows lagged, and not the way the sound dropped out at the same time. I left the footage paused on the frame just before the shift. The yard looked normal, still, empty. But knowing what came in the next fraction of a second, how everything would slip slightly out of place, made it feel like I was looking at something that wasn't as stable as it seemed. Like for those missing seconds, whatever the camera was pointed at wasn't quite aligned with how it should have been. I noticed it because it matched my steps. I was walking home late, cutting through a long stretch of quiet road that runs behind a row of warehouses. It's not somewhere I usually go, but I'd stayed later than planned at a friend's place, and it shaved about 10 minutes off the walk. My name's Marcus. I've done plenty of late walks, so being out at that hour didn't bother me. It was just after midnight, maybe closer to 1. Cold, dry air, no wind, and that kind of silence where your footsteps sound louder than they should. I had my hands in my jacket pockets, head down a bit, just following the pavement. That's when I heard it. A low tone. Not loud, just there. At first I thought it was coming from one of the buildings, maybe some kind of machinery still running inside, but it didn't sound like anything mechanical I could place. It was smooth, steady, no rhythm, just a constant note. I kept walking. The sound stayed exactly the same. Didn't get louder or quieter as I moved, didn't shift direction. It didn't echo either, which I noticed after a few seconds. The road has these long, flat walls on one side, and normally even a small sound bounces a little. This didn't. It felt like it was just above me. Not coming from a point, more like it was spread out. I slowed down slightly, listening. The tone stayed steady. Same pitch, same volume. I looked up. The sky was clear, dark, a few stars visible, nothing unusual, no planes, no lights, nothing that could explain it. I kept walking. After a few more steps, I started noticing something odd. The tone seemed to shift very slightly when my pace changed. Not in pitch exactly, more like it stretched or compressed. I sped up a bit. It felt tighter, closer. I slowed down, it relaxed again. That's when I stopped completely. And it cut out, not faded, not reduced, just gone. The silence that replaced it felt heavier than before, like something had been filling the space and then suddenly wasn't. I stood still for a few seconds, waiting. Nothing, no tone, just my breathing and the faint sound of something far off, maybe a car miles away. I took one step forward. The tone came back instantly. Same note, same volume, like it had been paused. I froze again, gone. I moved again, back, forward. Each time I moved even slightly, it came back. Each time I stopped, it vanished. I stood there in the middle of the road, testing it. Small steps, larger steps, even just shifting my weight. As long as I was moving, it was there. The moment I became completely still, it stopped. I looked around again. The buildings were dark, no lights in any windows, no movement, no sign of anything running or active. I even walked closer to one of the warehouse walls, thinking maybe the sound was reflecting in some weird way. It didn't change, didn't get louder near the wall, didn't echo. Still just above. I stepped off the pavement and onto the gravel edge. The crunch under my shoes was loud in the silence, but the tone sat above it, unchanged. Then I tried something else. I started walking faster, not running, but a quick pace. The tone followed exactly, no delay, no buildup. It was just there, perfectly matched to my movement. I slowed down again. Same thing. Then I stopped suddenly. The silence hit immediately. That instant cutoff started to feel wrong, not natural. Even sounds from machines take a fraction of a second to wind down. This didn't. It was either fully there or not at all. I felt this weird pressure in my chest then. Not pain, just tension. Like I was being watched, but not in the usual sense. More like something was aware of my movement specifically. I started walking again, but this time I didn't look up. I kept my eyes on the ground, focusing on getting through that stretch. The tone stayed above me, constant, flat. At one point I passed under a streetlight that actually worked, one of the few on that road. The light flickered slightly as I stepped into it, and for a moment the tone seemed to thin out. Not disappear, just become less solid. Then as I stepped past the light, it returned to normal. I didn't stop that time. I just kept walking. Faster now. The tone kept up. Always the same distance above me. Always the same volume. No matter how I moved. When I finally reached the end of that road and turned onto a busier street, I slowed down again. There were lights, a couple of parked cars, more ambient noise. I stopped. The tone cut out again, but this time it didn't come back when I moved. I walked a few steps, nothing. I walked faster, still nothing. It was just gone, like it had been limited to that one stretch. I turned back once, looking down the road I'd come from. It was empty, dark, completely normal. But the way the sound had behaved, like it was tied directly to my movement and how it only existed when I was in motion, it didn't feel like something external. It felt like something reacting. And the fact that it stopped the second I stood still every single time made it feel less like a sound in the environment and more like something that needed me to be moving to exist at all. The power went out without any warning. I was in the kitchen rinsing a mug when everything just cut. Lights, the fridge, the small radio I had on. It didn't flicker or dip first. Just off. The house went quiet in a way that felt heavier than normal. My name's Mark. I live in a small coastal town, a few streets back from the water. Power cuts aren't that rare when the weather turns, but that night there hadn't been anything unusual. No wind, no rain, just a still, slightly humid evening. I stood there for a second, waiting for something to kick back on. Nothing did. I set the mug down and checked my phone. No signal. That was odd. Even during outages, I usually get at least one bar. I walked into the living room and looked out the front window. The entire street was dark. Not just my house. Everything. No porch lights, no street lights. Just a flat, dim outline of the houses across from me. I grabbed a torch from the drawer and stepped outside. The air felt strange. Not colder, not warmer. Just still. Too still. There's usually some kind of movement near the coast. Even on calm nights, you get a breeze off the water. That night, nothing. I stepped out onto the pavement and looked up the street. A couple of doors down, I saw my neighbor, Paul, standing outside his house. He raised a hand slightly when he noticed me. "Power's gone?" I called out. "Looks like it," he said. His voice sounded flat, like it didn't carry properly. I started to walk toward him, but something made me stop. It wasn't anything he did. It was the sky. I glanced up without really thinking, just out of habit, and saw it. At first, I thought it was just a lighter patch of cloud, a circle, faint, barely visible. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't part of the cloud pattern. It was separate, a soft, circular glow like a ring, sitting within the clouds, not bright, just enough to define the shape. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The edges weren't sharp, more like a gentle boundary where the cloud was slightly brighter. I took a step forward into the road, tilting my head back. "Paul," I said, not taking my eyes off it, "do you see that?" There was a pause. "See what?" "The sky, right above." I stopped, because as I said it, the glow seemed to shift, not move, just adjust, like it became clearer once I focused on it. Paul stepped closer to the edge of his drive. "I don't," he started, then stopped. "Wait." I glanced at him. He was looking up now, too. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I see it." We both stood there, staring. The circle didn't expand, didn't drift with the clouds. It just stayed there, perfectly still. The rest of the sky looked normal, clouds moving slowly, barely noticeable. But that circle, it didn't move with them. It stayed fixed, as if it was independent of the clouds themselves. I took another step forward, out into the middle of the road. The surface under my feet felt slightly warmer than it should have. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. I kept my eyes on the circle. It didn't change brightness, didn't pulse, just held that same faint glow. I tried to judge how big it was. It was hard. Without a clear reference, it could have been small and close or huge and far away. But something about it made it feel large. Much larger than it looked, like the edges were only part of it. "Is that light?" Paul asked. I didn't answer right away, because it didn't behave like light. It didn't illuminate anything. The ground stayed dark, the houses stayed in shadow, even the clouds around it didn't brighten. It was just there, visible but not affecting anything. We stood there for what felt like a long time, neither of us speaking, just watching. At some point I noticed the sound, or rather the lack of it. No cars, no distant hum of anything. Even the usual background noise of the town felt muted. I shifted my weight slightly. The gravel near the edge of the road made a faint crunch, but it sounded dull, like the sound didn't travel properly. I looked back up. The circle was still there, unchanged. Then, slowly it began to fade. Not shrink, not move, just lose intensity. The edges softened further, blending into the surrounding cloud. I took a step forward without thinking, as if getting closer might make a difference. It didn't. The glow continued to fade, until it was barely distinguishable from the rest of the sky. Then it was gone. The clouds looked normal again, uniform, no shape, no pattern, just gray. I stood there, staring at where it had been, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. A few seconds later, the streetlight at the corner flickered, then came on. One by one, lights started to return along the road. Houses lit up. The faint hum of electricity came back. Paul let out a breath. "What the hell was that?" he said. I didn't answer. I was still looking at the sky. It looked completely normal now. No trace of anything. I went back inside after a bit. The power was fully back. Everything in the house worked as it should. I checked my phone again. Signal had returned. I even looked up local outages later. There had been one brief, affecting a few streets. Nothing unusual reported. But that circle, the way it formed without affecting anything around it, and how it stayed perfectly still while the clouds moved, it didn't feel like something in the sky. It felt like something behind it, showing through just enough to be seen, before closing again. I caught it in the headlights for less than a second, but it was enough that I knew I didn't imagine it. I was driving back from my brother's place, late, maybe just after midnight. It had been raining earlier, not heavy, just enough to leave the roads damp and the air kind of thick. By the time I left, it had stopped, but the sky was still overcast. Low clouds, no stars. My name's Leah. I've driven that stretch of road more times than I can count. It runs through open farmland for a good few miles. No streetlights, just long, straight sections with hedges on either side. That night felt normal at first. Wipers off, heater on low, just the sound of the tires moving over wet asphalt. I remember checking the clock on the dash, 12:17, and then looking back up at the road. That's when it happened. The headlights hit something above me, not directly in front. Higher, like the beam caught it at an angle. For a split second, I saw a reflection. Sharp, metallic. Not bright like a mirror, but enough to stand out against the dark sky. It wasn't big, or at least, it didn't look big from where I was. Just a smooth, curved surface. No edges I could make out. It tilted slightly, and then it was gone. Not moved away gradually, just gone. Upward, faster than anything I've ever seen move. I instinctively hit the brakes. The car slowed hard, tires hissing against the wet road. I leaned forward, looking up through the windshield. Nothing. Just clouds. I checked the mirrors, rear view first, then side mirrors. Nothing behind me. No lights. No reflection. I pulled the car to the side of the road and stopped. Engine still running, headlights cutting into the dark ahead. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to process what I'd just seen. My first thought was a drone, but it didn't move like one, and it hadn't made any sound. No buzzing, no whirring, nothing. I opened the window slightly. Cold air came in. The night was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Usually you hear something out there. Wind, distant animals, something moving in the fields. But at that moment, there was nothing. I stepped out of the car, closed the door softly, looked up. The clouds were low and uniform. No gaps, no movement that stood out. If something had gone up into them, there was no trace of it. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the sky. Nothing. I walked a few steps away from the car, into the road, just to get a clearer view. Still nothing. I went back to where the headlights had caught it, tried to picture the angle. It had been almost directly above the road, maybe a little to the right. I stepped forward a few paces, looking up at that spot. That's when I noticed something else. The air didn't look right. It's hard to explain. It wasn't visible in a clear way, but there was a slight distortion, like the space above the road had just settled. Not moving, just slightly off. I blinked a few times, trying to focus on it. It didn't hold. The longer I looked, the more it seemed normal. I backed up slowly, returning to the car. As I got closer, I noticed the inside lights were dimmer than usual. Not off, just lower. I hadn't touched anything. I opened the door and got back in. The dashboard lights flickered slightly as I sat down, then returned to normal. I checked the clock again. 12:21. That didn't make sense. It had only felt like a minute or two. I looked at my phone. Same time. I sat there, engine idling, staring at the road ahead, trying to figure out if I'd just lost track of time. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like I'd been standing there for maybe 2 minutes, not 4. I shook it off and pulled back onto the road, started driving again, slower this time. Eyes constantly flicking upward, scanning the sky. Nothing else happened for a while. Just the road, the hedges, the occasional bend. But something felt off. Not in the sky, in the way the headlights hit things. Every now and then I'd catch a reflection off something, wet leaves, fence posts, and for a split second it would feel too sharp, too clean, like it didn't belong. Each time I'd tense up, expecting to see that metallic surface again, but it never appeared. About 10 minutes later, I passed a small lay-by. There's a sign there, just reflective, catches the headlights pretty strongly. As I drove past it, the reflection hit the windshield, and for just a moment, it split, like there were 2 reflections instead of 1. Offset slightly. Then it snapped back to normal. I checked the mirrors again. Nothing behind me. I didn't stop that time. Just kept driving. Hands tight on the wheel. The rest of the way home felt longer than usual. Every shadow looked wrong. Every reflection felt like it might turn into something else. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a minute before turning the engine off. The house looked normal. Lights off. Everything quiet. I looked up at the sky one last time. Still overcast, no movement, nothing out of place. But that reflection, the way it caught the headlights and how it tilted before it vanished, it didn't feel like something passing overhead. It felt like something had been there already, just outside of sight. And for a second, the light hit it in the exact way needed to make it visible, before it corrected itself and moved out of reach. It went quiet so suddenly I thought my ears had popped. I was halfway through unzipping my sleeping bag when it happened. 1 second there were the usual sounds, wind brushing through the trees, something small moving in the undergrowth, the faint crackle from the fire I'd just put out. Then, all of it dropped out at once. Not faded, not reduced, just gone. My name's Tyler. I'd hiked out earlier that day and set up camp a few miles off a trail I know pretty well. It's not deep wilderness, but far enough that you don't hear roads or see other people at night. I froze where I was, one hand still on the zipper. The silence didn't feel normal. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it felt like pressure, like something was pushing in on the space around me. I stayed completely still, listening. Nothing. No wind. No insects, not even the distant creak of branches. I slowly straightened up and looked around. The trees stood exactly as they had before. Tall, close together, barely moving. The sky above was dark, only small gaps between branches showing any stars. Everything looked the same, but the silence didn't match it. I took a step forward. The ground should have made some noise. Dry leaves, twigs, but I didn't hear anything. I felt it under my boots. I saw the movement, but there was no sound. That's when it started to feel wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Like I wasn't just in a quiet place, like something had been removed. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, trying to see if anything else had changed. That's when I noticed the shimmer. It was faint. So faint I almost missed it. A distortion between 2 trees about 20 feet ahead. At first I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, but it moved. Not like something physical moving through the space, more like the air itself shifting, like heat rising off a surface, except it wasn't rising. It moved horizontally, a slow, steady drift between the trunks. I focused on it, trying to get a better look. The shimmer didn't have a clear edge, but it bent the shapes behind it. The tree trunks looked slightly warped through it. The gaps between branches stretched and then snapped back as it passed. I didn't move, didn't even breathe properly. I just watched it. It kept moving. Same pace, same direction, no sound, no disturbance to anything around it. The leaves didn't react, the branches didn't sway. It just passed through. For a moment, it moved closer. Not directly toward me, just across my line of sight. The distortion became clearer then, like looking through uneven glass. I had this strong feeling I shouldn't move. Not out of fear exactly, more like instinct. Like moving might draw attention to me. The shimmer continued past, between more trees, still that same slow, steady movement. Then it paused. Just for a second. In a space where the trees opened up slightly, it held there. The distortion more concentrated now, like the air in that spot was thicker. Then it moved again. Same direction, and then it was gone. Not faded, not disappeared into the distance, just no longer there. The space it had occupied snapped back to normal. The trees looked straight again, the gaps between branches returned to how they should be, and then the sound came back. All at once. Wind in the trees, a distant rustle, the faint crackle from the fire pit. Even the sound of my own breathing seemed too loud. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding it. Took a step back. This time, I heard it. Leaves crunching under my boots. Normal, everything normal. I looked around again. Nothing out of place. No sign of the shimmer, no indication anything had passed through. I stayed standing there for a while, trying to make sense of it, but there was nothing to connect it to. No explanation that fit what I'd seen. Eventually, I zipped up the sleeping bag and got inside the tent. I didn't put the light on, just lay there in the dark, listening. The forest sounded like it always does at night. Unpredictable but familiar. Every now and then I'd hear something shift outside and tense up, half expecting the silence to drop again, but it didn't. The sounds stayed, the wind kept moving, everything continued as normal. But the way it had all stopped, at the exact same moment, and how that shimmer had moved through without touching anything, it didn't feel like something passing through the forest. It felt more like the forest itself had paused, just long enough for something to move through it, and then started again like nothing had happened. I noticed it because the line stopped moving. I'd been sitting there for a while, watching the tip of the rod, waiting for any kind of tug. It was early evening, just before the light started to go properly flat. The lake was calm, barely any ripple except where the line broke the surface. My name's Dean. I go out there most weekends when I can. It's a small lake, nothing remote, but quiet enough that you don't get bothered much. A few other people sometimes, but that day I was alone on that side. I remember checking the line because it had gone completely still. Not just no bites, completely still. Even when there's nothing going on, the water usually shifts a bit. Wind, insects, something. But right around where my line was, the surface looked flat, like a patch of glass. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see if I'd snagged something below. That's when I saw it. A faint glow under the water. Not bright. Just enough to notice once your eyes adjusted. It was maybe a couple of feet beneath the surface, directly below where the line disappeared. At first, I thought it was sunlight catching something, maybe a pale rock or a bit of trash reflecting light, but the sun was already low behind me, and the angle didn't line up. The glow didn't shift with the surface either. It stayed perfectly still. I stood up slowly, keeping my eyes on it. The rest of the lake looked normal. Small ripples, bits of movement here and there, but that one area completely calm, and the glow underneath it just there. I took a few steps closer to the edge. The ground was damp, soft under my boots. I crouched down slightly, trying to get a better angle. The glow didn't change, didn't flicker, didn't react to my movement. It had no clear shape, just a soft, pale patch of light. I pulled the rod up a little just to see if the line would move. It lifted cleanly. No resistance. No snag. The line came free, but the glow stayed exactly where it was. That's when it started to feel wrong. Because if it had been something on the line, anything physical, it should have moved, but it didn't. It wasn't connected to anything I was doing. I reeled the line in slowly, keeping one eye on the water. The hook came up empty. No debris, no fish, nothing. I set the rod down and focused completely on the glow. It didn't spread, didn't get brighter, just held there, under the surface, perfectly still. I looked around the rest of the lake again. No one else, no boats, no lights reflecting from anywhere, nothing that could be causing it. I picked up a small stone from the ground, turned it over in my hand, then tossed it gently into the water just to the side of the glow. The splash broke the surface. Ripples spread outward. But when they reached the area above the glow, they changed. Not stopped, just slowed. Like the water, there was thicker somehow. The ripples passed through, but they lost their shape, flattened slightly, then continued on as normal once they were past it. I frowned and picked up another stone. This time I threw it closer, almost directly above the glow. The splash landed right over it. For a moment, the glow seemed to blur, not move, just distort slightly. Then it returned to the same steady shape, still beneath the surface, still not rising. I stayed there, watching it. Minutes passed, nothing changed, no bubbles, no movement, No sign that it was connected to anything deeper in the lake. Then, it started to fade. Very slowly. So slowly I wasn't sure at first if it was actually happening, but it was. The brightness reduced, little by little, still not moving, still in the same exact spot, just becoming less visible. I leaned in closer and to catch the last of it. The surface of the water above it remained completely calm, unnaturally so compared to everything around it. The glow continued to fade until it was barely there, then gone. The water looked normal again. Ripples moved across it the same as everywhere else. Nothing left behind. I stayed crouched there for a bit, staring at the spot, waiting for it to come back. Nothing did. Eventually, I sat back down, picked up the rod again, cast the line out to the same area. It landed normally. The surface moved like it should. No flat patch, no glow. I tried fishing a bit longer, but I couldn't focus. Every now and then, I'd glance at the water, expecting to see that stillness again, but it never returned. What stuck with me wasn't just the light. It was how the water above it behaved. Like that part of the lake wasn't reacting the same way as the rest, like whatever was under there wasn't part of the same system as everything around it. I saw it just past the bend, right where the fog got thicker. I'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes already, slow the whole way because visibility was bad. It was one of those nights where the fog doesn't sit evenly. It comes in patches, thicker in dips and low areas. This road cuts through farmland, long stretches with nothing but hedges and open fields on either side. My name's Aaron. I was heading back from a late shift around 1 a.m., taking the usual route home. I'd driven that road plenty of times before. That night felt off, even before I saw anything. The fog wasn't just thick, it felt close, like it wasn't just hanging in the air, but pressing in toward the road. My headlights didn't reach very far, maybe 20 feet at most before everything blurred out into that dull gray wall. I remember gripping the wheel tighter than usual, leaning forward a bit, trying to see through it. That's when I noticed the light. It was faint, pale, almost like a reflection at first, sitting low over the road ahead, maybe knee height. I slowed down instinctively, easing off the accelerator. At first, I thought it might be something reflective, like a marker or a bit of debris catching the headlights. But it didn't behave like that. It didn't flare or change brightness when I moved. It just stayed there. A soft, steady glow, not lighting anything around it. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. If it was bright enough for me to see, it should have been lighting the ground. But the road beneath it stayed dark. No spill of light. No reflection. Just that isolated glow. I tapped the brakes and dropped my speed even more. The engine hummed quietly. The tires made that soft hiss against the damp road. Everything else felt muted. I kept my eyes locked on the light. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just hovered there slightly above the surface. I glanced quickly to the sides, checking for any source, house lights, farm equipment, anything. Nothing. Just hedges and fog. I looked back at the light. Still there. Same position, same brightness. I remember thinking it might be some kind of optical thing, like the fog catching my headlights in a weird way. So I adjusted my angle slightly, moving the wheel a bit to the right. The light didn't shift. It stayed exactly where it was relative to the road. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I slowed almost to a crawl. The distance between me and the light closed gradually. 10 feet. Then maybe 8. The closer I got, the less defined it looked. Not because it was fading, but because it didn't seem to have edges. It was just a patch of pale brightness, suspended. I rolled down the window slightly. Cold air came in, damp and still. No sound from the light. No hum. No crackle. Nothing. Just silence. I crept forward. 5 feet now. The headlights hit it directly, and for a split second, it looked like the beam bent. Not dramatically. Just enough that I noticed something off. Like the light from the car didn't pass through it cleanly. Then it happened. The glow started to thin out, not move, just lose itself, like fog absorbing it. It didn't shrink or drift away, it just became less visible, fading into the fog around it. Within a second or two, it was gone. The space where it had been looked exactly like the rest of the road, just fog and darkness. I kept rolling forward slowly, heart beating harder than it should have been. I passed through the spot where it had hovered. Nothing. No change in temperature, no sound, no feeling of anything being there. Just empty road. I checked my mirrors immediately. The rear view first. Nothing. Then the side mirrors. Still nothing. No glow behind me, no reflection. Just fog swallowing the road behind. I drove a bit further, maybe another 100 yards, then pulled over. I didn't turn the engine off. Just sat there, hands still on the wheel, trying to process what I'd just seen. I looked ahead again. The fog moved slightly, drifting across the road. For a second, I thought I saw another faint brightness further up, but it didn't hold. Just normal variation in the fog. I stayed there for a minute or two, then decided to keep going. Didn't want to sit there any longer than I had to. As I drove, I kept scanning the road, expecting to see it again, but nothing else appeared. The rest of the drive was normal. Fog thinned out eventually as I got closer to town. Streetlights came back, other cars, everything felt grounded again. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a bit before going inside, just thinking about how it had looked. That glow, the way it didn't light anything around it, and how it didn't move when I approached. It just let me come to it, then disappeared exactly when I got close enough to really see it. Like it wasn't meant to be observed up close, or like it only existed at a distance, right at the edge of where you can make sense of what you're looking at. I noticed it because the road didn't look straight for a second. It was late, around 2:15 a.m., and I was heading back from a job in a small industrial area about 40 minutes from home. I take the same route most nights, long stretches of empty road, no lights except what the car throws out in front. My name's Alex. I've done enough of these drives that everything becomes automatic. You stop really thinking about it. Just follow the lines, keep the speed steady, let your mind drift. That night felt normal at first. Cold, clear, no wind. The kind of night where the sky looks deeper than usual. I was about halfway through the longest stretch, no houses, just fields on both sides, when I saw it. At first, it didn't register as anything specific, just a brief distortion in the headlights, like the beam had hit something uneven. But there was nothing there. No debris, no animal, no sign, just empty road. Then it happened again. A fraction of a second. The light bent slightly, like it was passing through something. Not blocked, not reflected. Just altered. I slowed down a bit, instinct kicking in. Focused on the road ahead, trying to see if there was something I'd missed. Everything looked normal. The lines were straight, the asphalt flat, no movement. I drove another few meters. Then I saw it clearly, a faint ripple in the air. That's the closest I can get to describing it. Like heat distortion you see above a hot road in summer. Except it was cold. And this wasn't rising from the surface. It was suspended, maybe a few feet above the road. And it had shape. Not a defined outline, but a presence, a section of air that behaved differently from everything around it. My headlights hit it, and for that brief moment, the beam curved. Not dramatically, just enough that the edges of the light shifted slightly, like it was bending around something. I slowed almost to a crawl. My hands tightened on the wheel without me realizing it. The ripple stayed in place. Didn't move with the wind, there wasn't any. Didn't react to the car, just there. I leaned forward slightly, trying to focus. The closer I got, the harder it was to see, like my eyes couldn't quite lock onto it. The distortion became more subtle, but the effect on the light stayed. Then, just as I was about to reach it, it vanished. No fade, no movement away, just gone. The headlights went back to normal. Straight, even beam. Nothing in the air, nothing on the road. I stopped the car completely. Sat there in the middle of the road, engine idling, lights on, staring at the spot where it had been. Nothing. I opened the window. Cold air came in. No sound. No wind. No indication that anything had been there at all. I turned the wheel slightly, angling the headlights across the road, swept the beam back and forth, trying to catch any sign of it again. Nothing. I got out of the car. The road felt solid under my feet. Normal. I walked forward slowly, eyes fixed on the air in front of me, looking for any sign of distortion, anything that didn't match the rest. There was nothing. The air looked completely still, clear. I stood there for a minute or two, listening, waiting. But nothing happened. I got back in the car and started driving again, slow at first, eyes constantly scanning ahead. Every few seconds, I expected to see it again. Another ripple, another bend in the light, but the road stayed empty, perfectly normal. After a while, I picked up speed again, trying to convince myself it was just my eyes, a trick of the light, maybe fatigue, but it didn't feel like that. because I'd seen the way the headlights reacted. Not just what I thought I saw, but how the light itself changed. A few miles down, I noticed something else. The interior of the car felt slightly off. Not colder, not warmer, just different, like the air pressure had shifted slightly. I swallowed. My ears popped faintly. Then it went back to normal. I glanced at the mirrors. Nothing behind me, no headlights, no movement, just empty roads stretching back into darkness. I kept driving, eventually reached the outskirts of town. Streetlights came back, other cars, normal life. But even under the lights, I kept thinking about that ripple, how it hadn't reflected anything, hadn't blocked anything, just bent the light. Like it was something present, but not fully there. And the way it disappeared, not moving away, just no longer existing in the space I was looking at. Now, whenever I drive that stretch, I don't just watch the road, I watch the air above it. Because for that moment, there was something in front of me, and the only reason I saw it at all was because my headlights reacted to it. I woke up because something felt off, not because of a sound. It was still dark in the room, but not completely. There was a faint glow near the foot of the bed, low and steady, like something small was lit up on the floor. I stayed still for a second, trying to figure out what I was looking at. Then I realized it was my phone. Face up on the floor, screen on. That didn't make sense. I always left it on the bedside table, plugged in. Same spot every night. I reached over without thinking and felt around. Charger cable was still there, unplugged, lying across the table. I sat up slowly. My name's Daniel. I live in a second-floor flat, just me. No pets, no one else with a key. The phone was about 2 feet from the bed, closer to the wardrobe than the table. It wasn't like it had just slipped off the edge either. It was placed flat, screen pointing straight up, still on. I got out of bed and picked it up. The screen was on the lock screen, but dimmed slightly like it had been that way for a while. No notifications, no apps open. The battery caught my attention next. It was at 6%. That didn't make sense either. I'd plugged it in before going to sleep. It should have been full or close to it. I checked the cable again. It wasn't damaged. The plug was still in the socket. I unlocked the phone. No recent apps, no open messages, no missed calls. Everything looked normal. I checked the screen time. It showed activity earlier in the night, a long block of it, from around 2:10 a.m. to just before 3. I checked the clock. It was 3:18 now. I had no memory of waking up, no memory of using the phone, nothing. I stood there in the dark, holding it, trying to piece it together. Maybe I'd woken up, checked something, then dropped it, but that didn't explain how it ended up so far from the bed, or why it wasn't plugged in anymore. I looked around the room. Everything else was normal. Wardrobe closed, door shut, curtains still drawn. I walked over to the door and opened it. The hallway was quiet, dark, no sign of anything out of place. I went back into the bedroom and turned on the light. The sudden brightness made everything feel more real, more normal. But the phone still didn't make sense. I checked the battery usage. It showed the screen had been on for most of that time. No major apps running, just the screen. I scrolled through the activity. Nothing unusual. No browsing history, no messages sent, no photos taken. Just time. I sat down on the bed, trying to think if I'd had a dream. Sometimes you half wake, do something, then fall back asleep. But this felt different. There was no gap I could recall. No fuzzy memory, just nothing. I put the phone back on the table, plugged it in again, watched it start charging. The screen went dark after a few seconds. I lay back down, but I didn't turn the light off straight away. Something about the room felt slightly off now. Not different in any visible way, just unsettled. After a minute, I reached over and turned the light off. The room went dark again. I stared at the ceiling, trying to relax. Then I noticed something else. The air felt warmer near my face, not the whole room, just a small area, like a patch. I shifted slightly on the pillow. The warmth stayed in the same spot. I moved again. It didn't follow me. It stayed fixed, like there was a small pocket of air that was different from the rest. I reached up with my hand, feeling around. There was a slight change, barely noticeable, but it was there. Then it faded, slowly, until the air felt the same again. I lay there for a while after that, not really moving, just listening. The usual sounds came back. Pipes, distant traffic, the building settling. Eventually, I must have drifted off again. When I woke up in the morning, everything looked normal. The phone was on the table, fully charged, exactly where I'd left it. I checked it again. The activity was still there. That block of time. Screen on, nothing happening. I checked the floor where I'd found it. No marks, no sign it had fallen or been dropped. Just the same carpet as always. I tried to recreate it in my head, getting up, unplugging the phone, walking over there, placing it down. But there was no reason for me to do that, and no memory of it happening. What stuck with me wasn't just the phone moving, it was how the screen had been on that whole time, like something had kept it active without actually doing anything on it. I noticed it because the corner of the ceiling didn't stay dark. I was lying on my back, not asleep, just staring up like you do when your brain won't switch off. It was late, probably around 3 a.m. The house was quiet. No TV, no traffic, just the occasional creak you get from old wood cooling down. My name's Leah. I live alone in a small terrace house. Nothing unusual about it. The bedroom faces the back and the curtains were fully closed that night. No light from outside, no street lamp bleed, nothing. That's why it stood out straight away, a faint glow, right along the edge where the wall meets the ceiling. At first I thought it was my eyes adjusting or maybe a car passing outside. You get that sometimes. Light sneaks through gaps in the curtains, moves across the ceiling for a second, then disappears. But this wasn't like that. It was too even, too soft. And it didn't come from one direction. It just appeared. A thin line of pale light running along the edge of the ceiling above my wardrobe. I stayed still, watching it, waiting for it to move the way outside light usually does. It didn't. It held there for a second or two. Then it started to slide, not fast, slow, steady, following the line where the ceiling met the wall, like something was tracing the room from above. I pushed myself up slightly on my elbows, trying to see if it was coming through the curtains somehow. But the curtains were still, fully drawn, no gaps, no movement. The glow continued along the ceiling edge, reaching the corner above the window. Then it turned. That's the part that made my stomach drop a bit, because it didn't spread or fade at the corner. It followed it, cleanly, like it knew the shape of the room. Now it was moving along the next wall, heading toward the door. Still that same soft brightness. Not lighting up the room, just existing as its own thing. I swung my legs out of bed slowly, not taking my eyes off it. The floor was cold. I stood up, keeping a bit of distance from the wall. Watching it move, I tried to see where the light was coming from. There was no visible source, no beam, no reflection, just that line, sliding along the ceiling edge. When it reached the corner above the door, it paused. Only for a second. Then it continued. Same pace, same smooth movement. I stepped closer, almost without thinking, close enough that I could see the texture of the paint on the wall. The glow didn't interact with it, didn't cast shadows, didn't change the color. It just sat on top of it, like it wasn't fully part of the surface. I reached out a hand, not touching it, just holding it near. There was no warmth, no change in the air, nothing. The glow kept moving, now above the door frame, then along the final stretch of wall, heading back toward the side of the bed. I turned slowly to keep it in view. My heart was beating harder now, not from panic exactly, just something wasn't right about it. It felt deliberate, not random, like it was following a path. When it reached the corner above my bed, it slowed down, just slightly. Then it started to dim, not disappearing all at once, just losing intensity. The line became thinner, fainter, until it was barely visible. Then it was gone. The ceiling went back to being completely dark. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the spot where it had been, waiting for it to come back. Nothing. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain aside a little. Outside was dark, no cars, no lights, everything still. I checked the rest of the room, looked along the walls, the ceiling. Nothing out of place. I even opened the door and checked the hallway. Same thing, dark, quiet, normal. When I got back into bed, I kept looking at the ceiling, half expecting it to happen again, but it didn't. The room stayed dark the rest of the night. What stuck with me wasn't just the light. It was how it moved. Like it wasn't spilling into the room or bouncing off anything. It stayed exactly where the wall met the ceiling and followed that line all the way around, like it was tracing the shape of the space I was in. I noticed it because it didn't sound like it was coming from anywhere. It started late, maybe around 11:30. I was upstairs, lying in bed, not asleep yet, just scrolling on my phone with the lights off. The house was quiet in that normal way, pipes ticking faintly, occasional distant car passing, nothing out of the ordinary. Then I heard it, a low hum. Not loud, just enough to sit on top of the silence. At first, I thought it was something inside the house, maybe the boiler kicking in or something electrical, but it didn't have that uneven mechanical quality. It was too smooth, steady, flat. I put the phone down and listened. It didn't change, didn't pulse, didn't fade, just stayed there. My name's Chris. I've lived in that house for years, so I know the usual sounds. This wasn't one of them. I sat up slowly, keeping my head tilted slightly, trying to figure out direction. It didn't have one. It felt like it was above me. Not in the ceiling, not in the attic. Higher. Like it was outside, somewhere over the roof. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The floor creaked under my weight, but the hum didn't react to it. Didn't shift. Didn't echo. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back a little. The street outside was dark, just a couple of dim streetlights down the road. No cars, no people. The hum stayed exactly the same. I opened the window slightly. Cold air came in. The sound didn't change. If anything, it felt more present. Not louder. Just closer. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to decide if I was imagining it. Then I grabbed my jacket and headed downstairs. The hum followed, or maybe it didn't follow. It just stayed where it was, and I moved under it. That's what it felt like I was stepping into the same space it occupied. I unlocked the back door and stepped outside. The moment I crossed the threshold, it stopped. Instantly. Not faded, not reduced, just gone. The silence that replaced it felt wrong for a second, like my ears needed to catch up. I stood there on the back step, looking up. The sky was clear, no clouds, no planes, nothing unusual. I waited. Nothing came back. I stepped further into the yard. Still nothing. The night sounded normal, distant traffic, faint wind, the usual background noise. I walked a few steps across the grass, scanning the roofline, the sky above it. Nothing. I went back inside. As soon as I closed the door behind me, the hum came back. Same level, same tone, like it had never left. I froze in the hallway, listened. It was definitely inside again, or at least it felt that way. I moved toward the stairs. The hum stayed consistent, no change in pitch or volume as I went up. When I reached the bedroom, it felt strongest there. Again, not louder, just centered, like that was where it was most noticeable. I stood in the middle of the room, turning slowly, trying to pinpoint it. But it didn't behave like a normal sound. It didn't get quieter when I turned away. It didn't get louder when I faced a certain direction. It just stayed. Even. Flat. I went back to the window, opened it wider, leaning out slightly. The moment my head passed the frame, the hum cut out again. I pulled back inside. It returned. I repeated it a few times. In, out, in, out. Every time I was inside, it was there. Every time I was outside, it wasn't. No transition, no delay, just on and off. I closed the window and sat on the bed. The hum filled the room again. I picked up my phone and opened a recording app, held it out in front of me, watched the levels. Nothing registered, no visible input. I moved it closer to the ceiling, then closer to the walls. Still nothing. The hum didn't seem to exist in a way the phone could detect, but I could hear it, or at least I was aware of it. After a while, I lay back down, stared at the ceiling. The hum didn't change, didn't get louder or softer, just stayed there, constant. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on something else, but it was too steady, too present. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember, it was morning. The room was quiet, no hum, everything normal. I checked the recording on my phone, nothing, just silence. I went outside again, looked up at the roof, the sky, nothing out of place, everything exactly as it should be. But that hum, the way it only existed when I was inside, and how it stopped the second I stepped out, it didn't feel like a sound coming from above the house. It felt like something that only existed within the space of it, like it wasn't outside at all, just positioned somewhere beyond the ceiling, only audible when you were under it. I saw it just after I turned off the main road. It was one of those narrow country lanes that cuts between open farmland, barely wide enough for 2 cars. No streetlights, no houses nearby, just long stretches of field on both sides. I take that route sometimes when I'm coming back late because it's quicker, even though it feels a bit too quiet at night. My name's Aaron. I'd been driving for about an hour already, so I was tired, but not the kind of tired where things blur. I was paying attention. The headlights were the only real light out there, cutting a tunnel through the dark. I noticed it off to the left first, a faint glow low to the ground. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe something metallic in the field catching the headlights at the right angle. But it didn't look like a reflection. It wasn't bright enough, and it didn't flicker or shift the way reflections usually do when you move. It just stayed. I slowed down slightly, this istid keeping my eyes on it. It hovered maybe a foot or two above the ground, not touching anything, not casting any light on the grass beneath it. That's what made it feel wrong straight away. If it was bright enough for me to see from the road, it should have lit up something around it, but it didn't. The ground under it stayed completely dark. I kept driving, watching it through the side of the windshield. The glow stayed in the same place for a few seconds. Then it moved, not toward me, not away, sideways, parallel to the road. It didn't drift or wobble. It moved in a straight line, smooth and steady, like it was sliding across something invisible. I slowed down more, almost crawling now. The car behind me, there wasn't one. No other headlights, no one around. Just me and that thing in the field. I cracked the window slightly. Cold air came in. No sound, no buzzing, no hum, nothing that matched the movement I was seeing. The glow kept moving, same speed, same height, still not lighting anything. It passed behind a slight rise in the ground, and for a moment I thought I'd lose sight of it, but it stayed visible, which didn't make sense. If it was low to the ground, the rise should have blocked it, but it didn't. It just continued on the same path as if the terrain didn't affect it. I eased the car to a stop, right in the middle of the lane, left the engine running, headlights pointing forward but my attention fixed to the side. The glow kept going, unbothered. It reached a patch where the field opened wider, flatter. Then it paused, just stopped moving. Hung there, perfectly still. I held my breath without realizing it, waiting for something to change. It didn't pulse, didn't flicker, just sat there. Then it started moving again, same direction, same smooth motion. I got out of the car. The gravel crunched under my shoes, loud in the silence. I stepped a few feet away from the door, keeping my eyes on it. From outside, it looked even stranger. There was no sense of depth to it, no clear edge, just a soft shape like a patch of light that didn't belong to anything. I tried to judge how far away it was. It was hard. It could have been 20 meters into the field, or further. There was nothing to compare it to. I took a step closer to the edge of the road. The glow didn't react, didn't change speed, didn't shift direction. It kept moving sideways like it hadn't noticed anything. Then, just as suddenly as it had paused before, it stopped again. I stayed still. The cold air made my hands stiff, but I didn't move. After a few seconds, it rose, not quickly, just a slow, straight upward movement. Still no light on the ground. Still no sound. It went up a few feet, then more, until it was above the level of the hedges. Then it dimmed, not fading out gradually, just reducing in brightness until it was barely visible. Then it was gone, no trace. The field went back to being completely dark. I stood there for a bit, staring at the space where it had been, trying to see if it would come back. Nothing, no movement, no light, just the empty field. I got back in the car, sat there for a moment before pulling away. As I drove, I kept glancing to the left, half expecting to see it again. But the field stayed dark, flat, normal. The rest of the drive was uneventful. Streetlights eventually came back as I got closer to town. Everything felt grounded again. But the thing that stayed with me wasn't just the glow itself. It was how it moved without affecting anything around it. No light on the ground, no shadows, no sound. Like it wasn't really part of the same space, just passing through it sideways. I woke up, already sitting halfway upright. I don't remember actually getting up. Just that feeling hit first, like I wasn't alone, and then I was there, staring toward the window. My name's Daniel. I live alone in a small house on the edge of a village. Nothing remote, but quiet enough that nights are usually dead still. I don't normally wake up like that. If something startles me, it takes a second to register. This was different. It felt immediate. Like I'd been pulled out of sleep because something was wrong. I didn't move at first, just stayed there, eyes fixed on the curtains. They were slightly open, only by a few inches, but I always closed them fully before going to bed. I'm pretty particular about that. The gap was just enough to show a thin strip of the outside, pale, early morning light coming through. Not fully daylight yet, just that gray-blue you get before sunrise. I stared at that gap, trying to figure out why it bothered me so much. Then it clicked. It wasn't just that they were open, it was the angle. They hadn't been pulled apart evenly. One side was slightly higher than the other, like it had been pushed from the bottom. I swallowed and listened. The house was quiet. No footsteps, no movement. Just the faint hum of something electrical downstairs. I glanced toward the bedroom door. Still closed. Exactly how I left it. I looked back at the window. Something about the light coming through didn't feel right either. It wasn't bright enough to fully light the room, but it was enough to make shapes visible. The dresser, the chair in the corner, everything looked normal, except the way the light sat. It didn't spread naturally. It was more like a narrow column, cutting into the room through that gap. I stayed still for a few more seconds, then slowly swung my legs out of bed. The floor was cold under my feet. That was the first physical thing I noticed. Colder than it should have been. Not freezing, just enough to stand out. I stood up carefully, eyes still on the curtains. Nothing moved. No shadow passed across the gap. No shift in the light. I took a step forward, then another. Each step felt louder than it should have, even though I knew I wasn't making much noise. I reached out and touched the edge of the curtain. It felt slightly damp, not wet, just cool and heavier than fabric should be. I hesitated for a second, then pulled it open wider. The outside looked completely normal, empty street, no cars, no people, just that early morning light starting to build. I leaned slightly closer to the glass. The window itself felt warm, not hot, just noticeably warmer than the room. That didn't make sense. It had been a cold night. The outside air should have made the glass feel cool, but it didn't. I pulled my hand back and looked around the room again. Everything was in place, nothing disturbed, no sign of anyone having been inside. But that feeling hadn't gone away. That sense that someone had been there, close, watching. I walked over to the door and opened it slowly. The hallway was empty, same dim light creeping in from downstairs. I stepped out and checked each room one by one. Living room, kitchen, bathroom, all normal, nothing missing, nothing moved. I went back upstairs and stood in the bedroom doorway, looking at the bed. The covers were slightly shifted, like I'd moved around in my sleep. But near the edge, right where I'd been lying, there was a slight indentation, deeper than the rest. I stared at it for a while, tried to convince myself it was just how the mattress settled. But it didn't look like that. It looked like pressure, like something had been there. I shook it off and went back to the window. The light outside had brightened a bit more now, normal daylight starting to take over. I checked the ground outside. No footprints, no sign of anyone standing near the house. I closed the curtains fully this time, made sure they met in the middle, evened them out. Then I stepped back. The room felt normal again, or at least closer to it. But there was one more thing. When I turned off the light later that night, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a faint mark on the inside of the window. Not dirt, not a smudge exactly. More like a slight distortion, only visible at certain angles, about eye level, as if something had been very close to the glass, not touching it fully, but close enough to leave a subtle difference in how the light passed through. I stood there for a long time trying to get a better look at it, but the more I focused, the less clear it became, until eventually it just looked like normal glass again. I checked the curtains before going to bed that night, closed them tight, made sure they wouldn't shift. Then I lay down and stared at the ceiling for a while, waiting for that feeling to come back. It didn't. But I didn't fall asleep for a long time. And every now and then I caught myself glancing toward the window, not because I saw anything, just because it felt like something might still be on the other side, standing exactly where that gap had been, watching through it. I felt it before I saw anything. It was like when you're in a plane and your ears suddenly pop, except I was just standing in my driveway. No change in altitude, no reason for it. I stopped mid-step, hands still on the car door, and pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth, trying to clear it. The pressure didn't go away. It built slightly, like something tightening inside my ears. My name's Elliot. This happened a few weeks ago, just after midnight. I'd gotten back late from a friend's place and was grabbing something from the car before heading inside. The night was quiet. No wind, no traffic, just that low, empty stillness you get in residential areas after everyone's gone to sleep. I stood there, head tilted slightly, waiting for the pressure. Instead, it shifted. Not painful, just wrong. Like my hearing had narrowed. I looked up without really thinking. That's when I saw the light. It was small, dim, moving slowly across the sky from left to right. At first glance, it looked like a distant plane, but there was no blinking, no red or green lights, just a single, steady point, and it was too quiet. I've lived here long enough to know the flight paths. You can usually hear planes before you see them, even at a distance. This made no sound at all. I squinted slightly, trying to focus on it. The pressure in my ears increased for a second, then steadied again. The light kept moving. Not fast, not slow either, just a smooth, even glide. I stepped away from the car, letting the door close behind me. The sound of it shutting felt muffled, like I was hearing it through something. I swallowed again, trying to clear my ears. No change. I kept watching the light. It didn't flicker, didn't change brightness, just held that same dim presence as it moved. Then I noticed something else. The sky around it looked slightly off, not in an obvious way. But the stars nearby, what few were visible through the light haze, seemed to dim slightly as it passed near them. Not disappear, just soften, like something was passing between me and them. I took a few steps further into the driveway, trying to get a clearer view. The ground felt normal under my feet, solid, but the air felt heavier, not humid, just dense. I raised my hand slightly, holding it up against the sky to block part of the view. The light passed behind it, but for a split second it seemed to lag, like it didn't line up perfectly with the motion. I lowered my hand slowly. The light continued its path. I checked the surrounding houses, all dark. No movement, no one else outside. I wanted to call out, but something stopped me. It felt like making noise would break something, like whatever was happening depended on things staying still. So I stayed quiet, watched. The light moved further across the sky. Then, very slightly, it changed direction. Not sharply, just a subtle curve, enough that it no longer followed a straight line. I frowned, trying to track it. The pressure in my ears shifted again. For a moment, it felt like one side cleared completely, then filled again just as quickly. I winced slightly, rubbing the side of my head. When I looked back up, the light had dimmed, not faded gradually, just less visible than it had been a second before. I stepped forward again, trying to keep it in view. It continued moving, but now it was harder to track, blending more with the sky. Then it stopped, not completely, but its movement slowed to the point where it looked almost stationary. It hung there for a second, perfectly still. The pressure in my ears peaked, a dull, tight sensation. Then it drifted upward, not fast, but faster than before, and as it rose, it faded, again, not gradually, just becoming less distinct with each moment, until it was gone. The sky looked normal again. Stars faintly visible, no sign of anything moving. At the same time, the pressure in my ears released, instantly, like a switch. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. The sounds of the night came back, distant hums, a faint rustle from somewhere down the street. I stood there for a while, staring at the empty sky, waiting to see if it would return. It didn't. Eventually, I went back to the car, grabbed what I needed, and went inside. Everything in the house felt normal. No lingering pressure, no strange sounds, just quiet. But later, lying in bed, I noticed something odd. When I turned my head, there was a slight delay in how things sounded, just for a fraction of a second. Like my ears weren't fully synced yet. It went away after a while, but every now and then I caught myself listening more carefully than usual, waiting for that pressure to come back. And sometimes when it's really quiet outside, I think about how that light moved. Not like something flying, more like something drifting through, and how the pressure didn't feel like it was coming from the sky. It felt like it was happening inside my head, like whatever passed overhead wasn't just visible, it was affecting the space I was standing in as it moved through it. The compass was the first thing that didn't make sense. I'd stopped to check my direction because the trail had started to thin out. more like a suggestion than anything solid. It was late afternoon, overcast, but still bright enough to see clearly. I was on a ridge that runs along the edge of a valley. Nothing extreme, but high enough that you can see for miles when the weather's clear. My name's Owen. I'd been hiking solo most of the day, something I do pretty often. I know how to navigate. I don't rely on just one thing, but I always carry a compass out of habit. I held it flat in my palm and waited for it to settle. It didn't. The needle drifted slightly to the right, then back, then stopped, but not pointing north. I frowned and adjusted my stance, thinking maybe I was holding it at a bad angle. I steadied my hand, waited again. The needle twitched, then slowly, almost reluctantly, moved a few degrees and stopped again. Still wrong. I glanced around, trying to figure out if there was something nearby that could be interfering. Metal, maybe, but there was nothing around me but rock, scrub, and the trail behind me. No structures, no fences, nothing. I took a step to the side and checked it again. Same thing, a slight drift. Then it held in a position that didn't match what I knew the direction should be. I checked my phone next. No signal. Not unusual up there. I opened the map anyway. The GPS indicator spun for a second, then fixed in place. But the orientation felt off. Not wildly, just enough that it didn't line up with the terrain around me. I lowered the phone and looked out over the valley. The light had changed slightly. Not darker, just flatter, like the contrast had been dialed down. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide whether to keep going or head back. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint, far off in the distance across the valley, low, near the ground. At first I thought it was just sunlight catching something, a reflective surface, maybe a vehicle or a building, but it didn't behave like that. It pulsed once. Not bright, just a soft increase and decrease in intensity. Then it stayed steady. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. The distance made it hard to judge size. It could have been small and close or larger and further away. There was no movement around it, no sign of anything that would explain it. I looked back at the compass. The needle had shifted again, only slightly, but enough that it was now pointing somewhere else entirely. I felt a small knot tighten in my stomach. I turned slowly, trying to match the compass reading with the landscape. Nothing lined up. The ridge, the slope, the tree line below, everything looked normal, but the compass insisted otherwise. I looked back at the glow. Still there, unchanged since that one pulse. I took a few steps forward along the ridge. The ground crunched under my boots. That sound felt dull, like it wasn't carrying properly. I stopped and listened. The wind had dropped, completely. No movement in the trees below, no distant sounds, just a quiet that felt heavier than it should. I took another step, then another, keeping my eyes on the glow. It didn't get any bigger, didn't shift, just held its position. I checked the compass again. The needle drifted, slower this time, like it was trying to settle but couldn't find a point. I shook my head slightly, more out of frustration than anything. Then I noticed something else. The horizon didn't feel stable, not visibly moving, but the line where the land met the sky seemed slightly off, like it wasn't perfectly straight. I blinked a few times, trying to clear my vision. It didn't change. I took a breath and turned away from the valley, looking back along the ridge. The trail behind me looked the same as it had before. No changes, no movement. I turned back to the glow. For a moment, I thought it had dimmed, but then it returned to the same faint level. I checked my watch. It had been maybe 10 minutes since I first noticed the compass acting up. It didn't feel like that long. I took another step forward. The ground beneath me felt slightly warmer. Not hot, just different. I stopped again. The silence pressed in. No wind, no insects, nothing. I looked down at the compass one more time. The needle had stopped moving, but it wasn't pointing anywhere meaningful, just fixed at an angle that didn't correspond to anything. I raised my head slowly. The glow pulsed again, once, same as before, soft, contained. Then it faded, not completely, just reduced slightly, then held there. I stood still watching it, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. After a while, I decided to turn back. I didn't like how the compass was behaving, didn't like how the air felt. I started walking back along the ridge, keeping a steady pace. After a few minutes, I glanced down at the compass again. The needle snapped to north. Clean. Immediate. No drift. No hesitation. I stopped walking, looked back over my shoulder. The valley looked normal, the horizon straight again. the light back to how it should be. I searched for the glow. It was gone. No trace of it. I stood there for a bit, debating whether to go back and check. But something about the way everything had returned to normal so completely made me keep moving. I didn't stop again until I was well off the ridge, back on a clearer part of the trail. Even then, I kept checking the compass. It behaved perfectly, like nothing had ever been wrong. But every now and then, when I think back to it, what sticks with me isn't the glow or the compass on its own. It's how both of them changed at the same time, and then stopped. Like whatever had been out there only affected that one stretch of ground. And once I stepped out of it, everything corrected itself, as if I'd moved out of alignment with something I wasn't supposed to notice in the first place. I felt it through the seat first. It was a quick vibration, like someone had tapped the underside of the car. Not strong enough to shake anything loose, just a dull, single buzz that ran up through the frame and into my legs. I sat up a little, hands still on the wheel, listening. The engine was off. The car had been parked for at least 10 minutes. My name's Rachel. I'd pulled into a small gravel lay-by just off a back road, the kind you pass without noticing unless you're looking for somewhere to stop. I'd been driving for a while and needed a break. It was late, around 2 a.m., and completely quiet out there. No houses nearby, no streetlights, just open land and a narrow stretch of road disappearing into the dark. I'd turned the engine off, leaned the seat back slightly, and was just sitting there, letting everything settle. That's when the vibration happened. I frowned and shifted my weight, expecting maybe it was something in the suspension settling, but nothing followed it. No second movement, no noise, just that single, brief pulse. I glanced down at the dashboard. Everything was off. Keys still in the ignition, but no electronics running. I waited a few seconds, then leaned forward, resting my hands on the wheel again. That's when I noticed the mirror. There was a faint glow above. Not in front of me, behind, reflected in the rearview mirror. I stared at it for a second, trying to place it. At first, I thought it might be another car, headlights approaching from behind. But the glow didn't behave like that. It wasn't bright enough, and it wasn't aligned with the road. It hovered higher, above the line of sight where a car would be. I adjusted the mirror slightly, angling it up. The glow stayed in view, a soft, dim light. No clear shape, just a patch of brightness against the dark sky. I turned slowly in my seat and looked out the rear window directly. Nothing, just darkness. The outline of the road behind me, no visible light source. I turned back to the mirror. The glow was still there. Same position, same intensity. My stomach tightened a little. I leaned forward again, bringing my face closer to the mirror. The glass felt normal, cool. I adjusted it again, tilting it slightly to the side. The glow moved with the angle, staying centered in the reflection, like it was directly behind me. But when I looked back, nothing. I sat there for a moment, not moving, just watching the mirror. The glow didn't flicker, didn't pulse. Just held steady, then slowly it shifted, not drifting across the sky. Just a slight movement, like it adjusted its position by a few degrees. I swallowed and reached for the door handle, paused, listened. Still nothing outside, no wind, no distant traffic, just that heavy, quiet stillness. I opened the door and stepped out. The gravel crunched under my boots. The sound felt too loud. I closed the door behind me and immediately looked up. The sky was clear, stars faint but visible. No glow, no light, nothing unusual. I walked around to the back of the car, stood there for a second, scanning the sky. Nothing. I leaned slightly, trying to match the angle from the mirror. Still nothing. I stepped a few feet away from the car, looked up again. The same empty sky. I turned slowly in a circle. Nothing. Then I looked back at the car. The interior was dark, except for the mirror. The glow was still there, faint, centered, exactly where I'd seen it before. I felt a small spike of panic, not sharp, just enough to make my chest tighten. I walked back toward the driver's side, slower this time. Opened the door, sat down. The seat felt colder than before. I looked at the mirror again. The glow hadn't changed. I reached up and tilted the mirror down. The glow moved out of view. I tilted it back up. There it was again. Same spot, same brightness. I reached for my phone and turned on the camera, pointed it at the mirror. The screen showed the interior clearly, but the glow wasn't there. I lowered the phone and looked at the mirror directly. Still there. I raised the phone again. Nothing. Just darkness. I felt my hands starting to shake slightly. I lowered the phone and set it on the seat beside me. The glow shifted again, just a little, like it was adjusting its position relative to me. I leaned to the side. It stayed centered. I sat back upright. Same thing. It didn't behave like a reflection from something fixed. It moved with me. Or maybe it stayed aligned with something above me. I wasn't sure. Then the seat vibrated again, slightly stronger this time. A low, brief hum through the frame. I froze. The glow in the mirror dimmed slightly, not fading, just less intense. Then it held. I didn't move. Didn't breathe properly. Just watched it. After a few seconds, it started to fade, slowly, until it blended into the darkness. Then it was gone. The mirror reflected only the empty sky. I stayed there for a while, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. Eventually, I started the car. The engine noise felt too loud, too normal. I pulled back onto the road and drove. Didn't look in the mirror again for a while. When I finally did, everything looked normal. Just the road behind me. Nothing above it. But every now and then, I caught myself glancing up, not at the road, but slightly above it, expecting to see that faint glow sitting there again, in a place that only existed in the reflection, like whatever it was hadn't been behind me, just positioned in a way that could only be seen from that exact angle through that mirror, and nowhere else. I noticed it because I was already awake. I'd gone out early to help my friend Callum check a fence line along his land. He's got this stretch of fields just outside a small village, nothing but open ground, low hedges, and a narrow dirt track cutting through it. I'd stayed over the night before in his spare room because we were planning to get started before sunrise. I stepped outside a little before 5. It was cold, that kind of early morning chill where everything feels damp and still. The sky was still mostly dark, just a faint hint of blue starting low on the horizon. Callum wasn't up yet, so I figured I'd give it a few minutes. I walked a bit away from the house, boots crunching lightly on the gravel, then onto the grass. There was no wind at all. Even the trees along the edge of the field looked frozen in place. I remember thinking how quiet it was, not even birds yet. I looked out toward the horizon, expecting that slow, even light you usually get before sunrise, but instead of the sky gradually brightening across the whole line, there was just a strip, a narrow, vertical band of light. It wasn't wide, maybe the width of a house at that distance. Just this straight, upright column of pale brightness cutting upward from the horizon. At first, I thought it was something local, like maybe a tall structure with lights on it or some kind of reflection. But it didn't look anchored to anything. It went straight up into the sky, and the edges were too clean. I took a few steps forward, squinting at it. The rest of the horizon stayed dark. Only that one section was lit. I glanced left and right, trying to see if there was anything else around it. Nothing, just fields and low hills. I stood there for a few seconds, watching. The light didn't spread, didn't move sideways. It just stayed there, steady. Then I noticed something else. The air felt off. Not colder, exactly. Just heavier, like the pressure had shifted slightly. My ears didn't pop or anything, but there was this subtle feeling, like being in a room where something had changed and you couldn't quite place it. I swallowed, looking back at the strip of light. It seemed a little brighter now, not much, just enough to stand out more against the dark sky. I pulled my phone out and opened the camera. Tried to zoom in, but it didn't pick up well. On the screen, it just looked like a faint blur. Nothing as defined as what I was seeing. I lowered the phone and looked again with my eyes. Still there. Sharp, straight. I took another step forward. The grass was wet underfoot, soaking through the edges of my boots. I didn't really notice. I was focused on that strip. Then it changed. Not suddenly. It started to pull back. The light didn't fade outward like a normal sunrise. It moved upward, like it was being drawn up into the sky. The bottom edge lifted off the horizon first. Slowly at first, then a little faster. I felt my chest tighten. I didn't move, just watched it. The strip kept retracting, maintaining its shape, that same narrow width, that same clean edge, but rising, leaving the horizon dark again behind it. It didn't scatter, didn't break apart, just pulled up as one piece, until it was no longer touching the ground. Now it was just a vertical column suspended above the horizon, and still moving. Upward. I realized I'd stopped breathing properly. I forced myself to take a breath. The air still felt wrong, like it was slightly thicker than it should be. I glanced back toward the house for a second. Part of me wanted to call out to Callum, but I didn't. I didn't want to look away for too long. When I looked back, the strip was higher now and dimmer, not fading evenly, just losing intensity as it rose, like it was moving into something or away from something. I couldn't tell. Then, about halfway up the sky, it just disappeared. Not faded out completely, not broken up, just gone. 1 second it was there, the next, nothing. The sky looked normal again, still dark, still early, no sign of the light. I stood there for a while, waiting for something else to happen. Anything. But nothing did. After a minute or two, I noticed the birds had started. Faint at first, then more, like normal morning noise coming back. The air felt different too, lighter, more like it should. I looked around again. The fields looked exactly the same. No changes, no marks, no movement, just quiet countryside. Callum came out a few minutes later, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," he said. "Yeah," I replied. I hesitated, then asked, "Did you see anything just now? Out here?" He frowned slightly. "Like what?" I looked back at the horizon. It was starting to brighten normally now, a soft, even glow spreading across. "Nothing," I said after a second. "Just thought I saw something weird with the light." He shrugged. "Probably just the sunrise." I didn't argue. We went about the morning like we'd planned. Checked the fence, walked the boundary. Everything felt normal again. But every now and then I'd catch myself looking back at that spot on the horizon, expecting to see that strip again, that clean vertical line, and the way it moved, not spreading like light should, not fading like anything natural. Just pulling itself upward, like it didn't belong there in the first place, like it had only been there temporarily, aligned in a way that only made sense from where I was standing, and once it shifted, there was nothing left to see. I didn't think anything of it at first because the footage looked like a glitch. It was just a flicker, half a second at most, then a jump forward in the timestamp, maybe 3 seconds missing. The kind of thing I'd seen before when the camera lagged or the Wi-Fi dropped. I only checked it because of what Jenna said. She lives 2 doors down. Early 40s, always outside doing something, watering plants, taking bins in, that kind of thing. Not the type to make things up. She caught me in the morning while I was getting into my car. "Hey," she said, a bit hesitant. "Were you home last night?" "Yeah," I said. "Why?" She glanced up at my roof, then back at me. "I thought I saw something. Around, I don't know, maybe 11:30? Lights. Just above your house." I shrugged slightly. "Probably a drone or something." She shook her head immediately. "No, it wasn't moving like that. It was just there, for a bit." Something about the way she said it made me pause. "That like hovering?" I asked. "Yeah," she said, "but not high, just above the roofline. And it didn't light anything up. That's what was weird." I didn't have an answer for that. "Did it make any noise?" I asked. She shook her head again. "Nothing. I only noticed because I was taking the bins out and saw the glow. Then it just went." I nodded slowly, not really knowing what to say. "I've got a camera out front," I said. "I'll check it later." She gave a small, relieved smile, like she was glad I didn't brush her off completely. "Yeah, just tell me if you see anything, all right?" "Sure." I got in the car and left it at that. All day, I didn't think about it much, just assumed it was something explainable, light reflection, someone's drone, anything like that. That night, I remembered. I opened the app for the security camera while I was sitting on the couch. It's just a basic setup, covers the front of the house and part of the street. I scrolled back to around 11:30, found the timestamp, played it. The footage looked normal. Empty street, my car parked out front, no movement. Then, right at 11:32, a flicker. Not bright, just a slight shift in the image, like the exposure changed for a split second. Then it cut forward. 11:32:14 to 11:30:17. 3 seconds gone. I rewound it, played it again, same thing. No visible source for the flicker, no light appearing in frame, just that brief distortion. Then the jump. I leaned forward, staring at the screen. Paused it just before the flicker. Everything looked normal. I advanced frame by frame. The flicker wasn't even a full frame, more like a blur. Then the timestamp skipped. I checked the rest of the footage. Nothing else unusual. No lights, no movement, no sign of anything hovering above. I sat back, frowning. It didn't match what Jenna described it. If something had been above the house, even faintly, the camera should have picked up something, even a reflection. But there was nothing, just that flicker. I checked the camera settings. Everything looked fine. No recorded connection drop, no error logs, just that small gap in the recording. I closed the app and sat there for a bit. The house was quiet, no sounds outside, no cars passing, just that still, late-night silence. After a while, I opened the app again, went back to the same clip, watched it one more time. This time I noticed something I hadn't before. Right before the flicker, the image shifted slightly. Not enough to be obvious, but the alignment of the frame changed, like the camera had moved a fraction of an inch. Then the flicker, then the skip, then everything back to normal. I leaned in closer to the screen, tried to see if there was any shadow movement, anything at all. Nothing, just the same empty street. I stood up and went to the front door, opened it, stepped outside. The night felt normal, cool air, faint distant noise. I looked up at the roofline, nothing, no lights, no glow. I walked a few steps into the street and looked up again. Still nothing. I stood there for a minute or two, just scanning the sky. Then I went back inside, closed the door, checked the footage again. Same result. I went to bed, but I didn't fall asleep right away. Kept thinking about what Jenna had said, how she described it. Low, hovering, not lighting anything around it, and how the camera showed nothing except that brief disturbance. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember, it was morning. I checked the footage again before leaving for work, scrolled through the night. Everything looked normal. No more flickers, no more missing frames, just that one moment. When I stepped outside, Jenna was already out front. She looked at me expectantly. "Well?" she asked. I hesitated for a second. "Nothing clear," I said. "Just a small glitch in the footage. Couple seconds missing." Her expression tightened slightly. "Nothing else? No lights? Nothing visible?" She looked up at my roof again. "I know what I saw," she said quietly. I nodded. "I'm not saying you didn't." She didn't respond. Just stood there for a moment longer, then turned and went back inside. I got in my car and sat there for a second before starting it. Something about it didn't sit right. Not the idea that she saw something, but how it lined up with the footage. That flicker, the slight shift in the frame, and those missing seconds. It didn't look like something passing in front of the camera. It looked more like the camera itself had been affected. Like for those few seconds, whatever she saw wasn't just above the house, but close enough or aligned in a way that the camera couldn't record it properly, only react to it, then skip past it entirely, as if those moments couldn't be captured at all. I noticed it because my foot hit the pavement and the shadow didn't. It was only by a fraction of a second, but enough to feel off, like when audio and video don't quite match. My leg moved forward, I stepped, and the shadow followed just slightly late. I slowed down without really thinking, looking at the ground ahead of me. It was late, maybe around 11. I'd taken the longer way back through a residential stretch that's usually quiet at night. Streetlights spaced out every 30 feet or so, casting those long, soft cones of light that fade into each other. My name's Kieran. I walk that route a lot, so I'm used to how everything looks under those lights. How your shadow stretches, shrinks, splits sometimes when you pass between two lamps. But this wasn't that. I stopped walking. The shadow stopped with me, perfectly aligned again. I shifted my weight slightly, rocking forward on one foot. The shadow matched it. I stood there for a second, trying to figure out if I'd just misread it. Then I started walking again. First step, normal. Second step, normal. Third step, there it was again. That slight delay, like the shadow had to catch up. I stopped more abruptly this time, turned around looking behind me. Nothing there, just the empty street. A parked car further down, no one else around. I looked back at the ground. The shadow was exactly where it should be. I lifted my foot slowly and set it down. No delay, everything matched. I let out a small breath, half laughing to myself, probably just the way the light was hitting. That's what I told myself. I kept walking, but now I was watching for it. Every step, every movement, trying to catch it again. A few more streetlights passed, everything seemed normal. Then I reached a slightly darker stretch. One of the lamps ahead was dimmer than the others. Not out, just weaker. My shadow stretched longer there, more diffuse. I walked into that patch and it happened again. more noticeable this time. My arm swung forward, and the shadow lagged, not by much, but enough that I saw the gap. Then it snapped into place. I stopped mid-step. Heart beating a little faster now, I raised my hand slowly, watched the shadow. It followed perfectly. I lowered it again. Still normal. I stepped forward. Normal. Another step. Delay. Then correction. I turned my head, looking at the light itself. It looked fine, just slightly dimmer, nothing flickering, nothing obviously wrong. I looked back at the ground. My shadow was steady. I took a step backward. It followed instantly. No lag. I stepped forward again. Normal. Then another step. There, that slight hesitation, like the shadow wasn't attached in the way it should be. I felt a tightness in my chest, not panic, just unease. I started walking faster. The shadow stretched and shrank as I moved between lights. For a few seconds, everything looked normal. Then, under the next lamp, it happened again. But this time it was different. Instead of lagging behind, it stayed where it was. For a split second, like it hadn't moved at all. Then it snapped forward to match me. I stopped immediately, turned sharply, looking around. Still no one, no movement. The houses on either side were dark, curtains drawn, no signs of anyone awake. I looked back down. The shadow was perfectly aligned again. I took a slow breath, lifted my foot, set it down carefully, no delay. I did it again. Still nothing. I stood there, unsure what to do next. The street felt too quiet now, like the usual background noise had faded. I could hear my own breathing more clearly than anything else. I glanced up at the nearest streetlight. It hummed faintly. A normal electrical buzz. I looked back down. The shadow waited. I took another step. Normal. Another. Normal. Then, again, that slight lag. But this time I saw something else. For just a moment, the shape wasn't quite right. Not a clear difference. Just a subtle distortion. Like the outline of my leg bent slightly in a way that didn't match my movement. Then it corrected itself. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't want to stand there anymore. I started walking again, faster now. Not running, just enough to get out of that stretch of road. The lights passed overhead one by one. Each time I entered a new pool of light, I braced myself. Watching, waiting. A few of them were normal. Then one more, and it happened again. The shadow fell behind, then snapped forward. I didn't stop this time, just kept moving. Eyes fixed ahead, trying not to look down. But I couldn't help it. I glanced. For a moment, there were two shadows, not clearly separated, just slightly offset, one where it should be, the other a fraction behind. Then they merged, back to one. I kept walking, faster now. The end of the street came into view, brighter lights from the main road ahead. I stepped into that brighter area, and it stopped, completely. The shadow behaved normally, no delay, no distortion. I slowed down, looked back over my shoulder. The street behind me looked the same as always. Dim lights, empty road, nothing unusual. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, then turned and walked the rest of the way home. I checked the shadows under every light after that. Everything normal, perfectly synced. But later, lying in bed, I kept thinking about that lag. That brief moment where the shadow didn't match. Not just delayed, but separate. Like it had its own timing. And for a second or two, it wasn't following me at all, just waiting, then catching up like it had missed something, like it wasn't always connected, just aligned most of the time. I noticed it because the fog didn't hide it. I was driving slow already. The road cuts through a stretch of low hills and fields, and that night the fog had settled in thick enough that you couldn't see more than maybe 20 feet ahead. Just a dull gray wall beyond the headlights. My name's Ben. I'd taken that road plenty of times, but not usually this late. It was just after 2 a.m., and there was no one else out there. The fog wasn't moving much either, just hanging there. Still, I had both hands on the wheel, leaning forward slightly, trying to keep the center line in view. That's when I saw the light, just ahead, maybe 15 feet in front of the car. A pale glow, not bright, almost like a reflection. But there was nothing around it to reflect. It hovered just above the road, maybe a foot or two off the surface. I eased off the accelerator without thinking. The car slowed. The light didn't move, didn't flicker, just stayed there, suspended in the fog. I remember squinting, trying to make out a shape. But there wasn't one, just a soft, diffuse glow. The fog around it didn't light up. That's what didn't make sense. It should have scattered, brightened the mist, but it didn't. The glow stayed contained, like it wasn't interacting with the air properly. I tapped the brakes gently. The car crept forward. The light stayed exactly where it was. No shift, no reaction. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then. Subtle, like when you're driving up a steep hill. I swallowed. It didn't change. I rolled the window down a crack. Cold air slipped in, no sound, no hum, nothing coming from the light. I looked in the mirrors briefly, nothing behind me, just the same wall of fog. I looked forward again. The light was still there, unchanged. I edged closer, 10 feet now. The glow sharpened slightly, not brighter, just more defined, like the edges were becoming clearer. Still no shape, just a patch of light that didn't behave the way it should. I slowed almost to a stop. The car idled forward. The headlights hit the fog. The beams spread out, but the glow stayed separate, unaffected. I felt that tightness in my chest then, not panic, just that creeping sense that I was getting too close to something I didn't understand. I hovered my foot over the brake. The car rolled forward another few feet, 5 feet away now. The light didn't move, didn't react, just hung there. I noticed something else then. The fog directly behind it looked slightly off, like it was thinner or stretched. Hard to describe. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel tighter. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. The air inside the car felt heavier, like it wasn't moving. I stopped the car completely. The engine idled quietly. The glow stayed in place, just ahead, still hovering. I watched it for a few seconds, waiting for it to do something. Anything. It didn't. Then, slowly, it began to fade. Not outward, not spreading, just dimming. Evenly, like someone turning it down. The edges softened first, then the center. The glow lost intensity. The fog around it stayed unchanged. No reaction, no disturbance. I held my breath without realizing. Watching it disappear, the light grew fainter, then gone. The fog filled the space where it had been, uniform again, like nothing had been there at all. I sat there for a second, engine running, hands still on the wheel. The pressure in my ears eased. The air felt normal again. I exhaled slowly, looked around. Nothing, just fog. I waited, half expecting it to come back. It didn't. I eased the car forward, drove through the spot where the light had been. Nothing happened. No change in the fog, no sensation, just empty road. I kept driving, slow, careful. The rest of the road stayed the same. No more lights, no movement, just that thick, silent fog. When I finally reached clearer air, I pulled over for a minute. Sat there with the engine off, listening. Everything sounded normal again. Distant road noise, a faint breeze. I checked the time, 2:19. It felt like longer had passed, or maybe less. I couldn't tell. I just sat there for a while, looking back at the road I'd come from. The fog had swallowed it completely. Now, whenever I drive that stretch in heavy fog, I don't just watch the road. I look for anything that stays visible when it shouldn't, something that hangs there just long enough for you to reach it, and then disappears, like it was never there at all. I felt it before I saw anything. It was that quick pressure shift in my ears, like when you go up in an elevator too fast. Not painful, just sudden enough to make me stop what I was doing. I was standing in my backyard at the time, just taking the bin out. It was late, maybe around 11:30. Clear night, no wind, one of those quiet ones where sound carries further than usual. My name's Aaron. I live on the edge of a small estate with fields behind the fence line. It's usually dead quiet at night. That's why the pressure stood out. I paused near the gate, one hand still on the bin lid, and swallowed, trying to clear it. It didn't go away. If anything, it felt like it deepened slightly. I looked up without really thinking about it. At first, I didn't see anything, just the usual sky, dark, scattered stars, nothing unusual. Then I noticed something moving. Not fast, not slow, just steady. A small point of light, dim, barely brighter than the stars around it, but it was moving in a way that didn't match anything I'd seen before. It wasn't blinking like a plane, didn't have the constant brightness of a satellite, and it wasn't following a straight path. It drifted, slightly off, like it was adjusting itself. I stood there, watching it. The pressure in my ears stayed constant. I tried swallowing again. Nothing. I stepped a little further into the yard, tilting my head back to keep it in view. The light continued across the sky, silent, completely silent. That's what started to bother me. Even distant planes make some kind of sound if you listen long enough. This didn't. It just moved. I noticed something else then. The stars around it looked off, not disappearing, just slightly dimmer for a moment as it passed near them, like something was between me and them. But there was no shape, just that point of light. I shifted my weight, trying to get a better angle. The pressure in my ears changed slightly, like it pulsed, in time with nothing I could identify. I glanced toward the house for a second. All the windows were dark, everything normal. I looked back up. The light had moved further now, still drifting, still silent. I felt a slight unease then. Nothing overwhelming, just that sense that I shouldn't be standing there watching it. I don't know why. It wasn't doing anything aggressive. Wasn't even that noticeable unless you were looking for it. But something about it felt wrong. I took a step back toward the door. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. I stopped, looked up again. The light was still there, still moving. I stepped forward again. The pressure returned, immediate, like crossing an invisible line. I froze, tested it again. One step back, pressure eased, one step forward, pressure came back. I stood there for a few seconds just repeating it, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But it was consistent, exactly the same each time. I looked up again. The light had slowed, not by much, but enough to notice. It hovered slightly, just for a second, then continued. The stars around it dimmed again briefly, same effect, subtle. But there, I felt my chest tighten a bit. I didn't like the idea that it had changed behavior while I was watching it. I stepped back again, further this time, closer to the house. The pressure in my ears faded completely. I stayed there, watching from a distance. The light picked up its steady movement again, drifting across the sky, no sound, no change in brightness, just that same faint point. Then, without warning, it shifted. Not a smooth turn, not a curve, a sudden change in direction, like it had snapped to a new path. Upward, at an angle. It moved faster now, still silent. The point of light grew slightly fainter as it climbed, then dimmer, then gone. No fade, no trail, just not there anymore. I stood there for a while, looking at the empty sky, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The air felt normal again. No pressure, no strange sensation, just quiet. I went back inside, closed the door behind me. The house felt the same as it always did, safe, still. But I kept thinking about that invisible line in the yard, the exact spot where the pressure started, like I'd stepped into something I wasn't supposed to notice. The next day, I went out and checked. Same spot, same yard, nothing unusual, no marks, no difference in the ground, just grass. Now, every time I step out there at night, I pay attention to how the air feels, because I know there's at least one place where something changed without making a sound, and something above noticed I was standing in it. I first noticed it when I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It was late, maybe around 11, and I was sitting just outside my tent. I'd set up camp off a narrow trail in a stretch of woodland about an hour from the nearest town. Nothing extreme, just somewhere quiet I'd been a couple of times before. My name's Callum. I go out alone sometimes when I need the break. No signal out there, no lights, just trees and whatever noise the forest makes at night. That night was calm. No wind, barely any movement in the leaves. You could hear everything. Little cracks from branches settling, insects, the occasional owl further off. Then, there was this low hum. At first, I thought it was something distant, maybe a generator from a farm or a car miles away. It was faint, kind of steady but not perfectly smooth, like a tone that wavered just a bit. I didn't pay much attention to it. I remember just sitting there, poking at the fire, letting it burn down. The sound stayed in the background, easy to ignore. Then it faded out. Not suddenly, just gone. Like someone had turned it down to nothing. I looked up, but there was nothing to see. Just dark trees around me, sky barely visible through the branches. A minute or so passed. Then the sound came back. But this time it felt like it was coming from somewhere else. Before, I'd assumed it was off to my left, deeper into the woods. Now it felt like it was behind me. Not louder, just repositioned. I turned slightly, listening. It didn't get clearer when I faced it, didn't get quieter when I turned away. It just stayed the same. That's when I started paying attention. I stood up, brushed the dirt off my hands, and walked a few steps away from the fire. The hum kept going, low and steady, like something electrical but softer. I tried to pinpoint it, walked a few steps in one direction, stopped, listened. Nothing changed, walked the other way. Same thing. No matter where I stood, it didn't seem any closer or further. It just existed. Then it faded out again. Same as before. Slow, smooth, gone. I stood there for a bit, listening to the normal forest sounds return. Everything felt ordinary again. I almost went back to the tent, thinking it was just something carrying weirdly through the trees. But then it came back again. This time it felt like it was above me. That's the only way I can describe it. Not loud, not directional, just over. I looked up through the branches, couldn't see much. The sky was mostly blocked, just small patches of stars between the leaves. Nothing moving, nothing unusual, but the sound stayed. That same low hum, wavering slightly. I felt it more than heard it at that point. Not vibrating the ground or anything like that, just this subtle pressure in my ears. I swallowed, tried to clear it, didn't help. The hum kept going. Then, without warning, it shifted again. This time, it felt like it was in front of me. Same distance, same volume, just somewhere else. That's when it stopped feeling like a distant source, because nothing moves like that. Not smoothly, not instantly, not without changing in volume or direction. I backed up toward the fire, more out of instinct than anything. The light from the embers made the trees around me look darker by comparison. The hum stayed. I grabbed my torch and switched it on. Swept it slowly across the trees. Nothing. Just trunks, branches, undergrowth. Normal. But as I moved the beam, I noticed something odd. The sound didn't react, didn't shift with the light, didn't get clearer or duller. It just stayed constant. I lowered the torch. The hum faded out again. I stood there in the quiet, heart beating a bit faster now. It came back a few seconds later. This time it felt like it was further away. Not a specific direction, just less present. Like it had stepped back. I walked a few paces toward where I thought it might be. It didn't change. Still felt distant. Then I stopped, and it felt closer again. Like it had moved. Not me. That's when I went back to the tent. I didn't rush, but I didn't take my time either. Just got inside, zipped it up, and sat there. The hum continued outside, fading in and out. Never staying long enough for me to get used to it. Never disappearing long enough for me to forget it. At one point, it sounded like it was right next to the tent. Not louder, just present. Like it was just beyond the fabric. I held my breath, listening, waiting for something else. A movement, a step, anything. But there was nothing, just the hum. Then it faded again. I checked my phone, no signal. Time looked normal, nothing unusual there. I lay back, staring at the inside of the tent. The hum came and went, each time from a different place, above, behind, somewhere off to the side. Never consistent, never trackable. At some point, I must have drifted off. Because when I woke up, it was light, quiet, no hum. Just birds and wind in the trees. Everything normal. I stepped outside. The campsite looked exactly how I'd left it. No signs of anything, no disturbed ground, nothing out of place. But the air felt lighter, like that pressure from the night before was gone. I packed up and left not long after. Didn't stick around. The whole drive back, I kept thinking about how the sound moved. Not like something traveling, not like it was passing through, more like it was just appearing in different places without crossing the space in between. I haven't been back to that spot since, not because I think something's out there, just because I don't think I'd hear it the same way again. And I'm not sure I want to. I woke up already sitting halfway upright. Not fully awake, just that sudden jolt where your body reacts before your mind catches up. My heart was already beating faster, like I'd just been startled, but I didn't know why yet. The room was dark, not completely, just the usual low light from outside bleeding through the curtains, enough to make out shapes, and I had this really clear feeling that someone had just been standing next to the bed. Close, right by my side. I didn't move at first, just sat there, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. I turned my head slowly toward that side of the room. The floor was empty. The chair in the corner was where it should be. The door was still closed. I stayed like that for a few seconds, trying to let the feeling pass. Sometimes you wake up from a dream and it lingers. That's what I told myself. But this didn't feel like a dream. It felt like I'd interrupted something. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The floor was cool under my feet. Normal. I walked over to the door and checked it. Still locked. I always lock it at night. I turned the handle slightly, just to be sure it didn't move. I let go and stood there for a second, listening again. Nothing. I turned back toward the bed. Everything looked the same, nothing out of place. That's when I noticed the window. It wasn't open, the curtains were drawn like I'd left them. But something about it felt off. I walked over slowly, reached out, and touched the glass through the gap in the curtain. It felt warm. Not hot, just warmer than it should have been, especially for that time of night. I pulled the curtain back slightly. The window looked normal, no condensation, no marks, nothing on the outside that I could see. I pressed my palm against it again. Still warm. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. It hadn't been warm earlier. I would have noticed. I stepped back and looked around the room again. Everything else felt normal. The air wasn't warm. The walls felt the same. Just the window. I glanced at the bed. The covers were slightly disturbed, like I'd moved more than usual. But nothing else. No sign of anything being there. I checked the time on my phone, 2:53 a.m. I remember that clearly. I set it back down and stood there, trying to shake the feeling, that sense that someone had been standing right next to me. Close enough that I would have seen them if I'd opened my eyes a second earlier. I walked back to the bed and sat down. The mattress shifted under my weight. Normal. I looked at the spot beside where I'd been lying. Nothing. Just the indentation from where I'd been. I reached out and touched it. Still slightly warm, but that made sense. I'd been lying there. I leaned back slowly, not fully lying down, just resting on my elbows, looking up at the ceiling, trying to calm down. That's when I noticed the silence, not complete, but reduced, like the usual background noise had dropped slightly. No distant cars, no wind, nothing. I swallowed, felt a faint pressure in my ears, subtle, like a shift in the air. I sat up again. The room felt contained, like the space had tightened slightly. I looked back at the window, still closed, still warm. I stood up again and walked over, pressed my hand against it. The warmth hadn't faded. I opened it slightly. Cold air came in immediately. Normal, fresh. I leaned closer, looking outside. Nothing, just the dark outline of the street. No movement, no lights. I closed the window again. The warmth stayed, like it was coming from the glass itself. I stepped back, waited. The pressure in my ears slowly eased, the silence lifted. Faint sounds returned, distant, normal. I checked the time again, 2:57. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I stood there for a while longer, watching the window, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I got back into bed, didn't pull the covers up fully, just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. The room felt normal again, no pressure, no silence, just the usual night sounds. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I remember was waking up in the morning, sunlight through the curtains, everything looking normal. I got up and went straight to the window, touched the glass. Cold, like it should be. No warmth, no sign anything had been different. I checked the door again. Still locked, exactly how I'd left it. That night, I made sure the window was closed tight, checked it twice, locked the door again, went to bed. I didn't wake up like that again. But now, sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up just enough to be aware of the room, and I find myself listening. Not for a sound, but for that feeling. Like someone might be standing right next to the bed again. Just out of sight. I noticed it because the motion alert didn't match anything I could see. I'd just gotten home from work around 6 in the evening, and my phone had a notification from the front camera. It's one of those basic setups, just a small camera mounted above the door, pointing at the driveway and part of the street. Normally it picks up cars passing or someone walking by. I opened the clip while I was still in the hallway. At first it looked like nothing. Empty driveway, street quiet. Then the image shifted, not like a glitch I'd seen before. The whole frame stretched slightly, like it had been pulled sideways for a fraction of a second. The edges of the driveway blurred. The car parked across the street looked warped, like the lines didn't quite line up anymore. Then it snapped back to normal. I replayed it. Same thing. Stretch, distort, back to normal. I checked the timestamp, 7:40:13. Then it jumped. Then it teamed. 5 seconds gone. I frowned, replayed it again. There was nothing in those missing seconds. Just that distortion right before the skip. No person, no car, nothing that would trigger motion. I stepped outside and looked at the driveway. Everything looked normal. No signs of anything. I went back in and checked earlier footage. Nothing like it. No other skips, no distortions, just normal recordings. I told myself it was probably just the camera lagging. Cheap system. Stuff like that happens. I made dinner, tried not to think about it. But later that night, around 10, I checked the camera again, just out of curiosity. Everything looked fine. Live feed was steady, no distortion. I left it on for a minute, watching. Nothing changed. I went to bed around midnight, slept normally, woke up the next morning and checked the app again. Another notification, same camera, different time. 2:16 a.m. I opened the clip, same pattern, empty driveway, no movement. Then the image stretched. This time it looked worse, like the middle of the frame had been pulled forward slightly, while the edges lagged behind. The fence line bent, the ground looked uneven. Then it snapped back. Timestamp jumped. 5 seconds missing again. I watched it a few times. The distortion didn't look random. It looked directional, like something had moved through the frame, but without being visible. Just the effect of it passing. I went outside again. Morning light this time. Everything normal. I checked the camera itself. Mounted securely. No damage. No loose wiring. I even tapped it lightly to see if I could recreate the distortion. Nothing. That evening, I mentioned it to my neighbor Craig. He shrugged it off. Probably just interference, he said. Wi-Fi or something. That made sense. Enough to settle it for a bit. But that night I kept checking. Around 2 a.m., I was still awake. Couldn't sleep. So I opened the live feed, just watched it. The driveway was empty, street quiet, no movement. The image was steady. Then it happened in real time. The frame stretched, just like in the recordings. But seeing it live felt different, more immediate. The distortion moved across the screen from left to right, like something invisible was passing through. The fence warped, the ground shifted, the edges of the frame bent inward slightly. Then it snapped back. I stared at the screen, heart rate picking up. The timestamp on the live feed froze for a second, then jumped forward. 5 seconds. Gone. I checked the time on my phone. It didn't match. It felt like less time had passed. I stood up, walked to the front door, opened it slowly, looked outside. Nothing, just the driveway. Still, quiet. I stepped out onto the porch. The air felt flat, not cold, not warm, just still. I looked around. No movement, no sound. I went back inside, closed the door, checked the camera feed again. Everything looked normal. No distortion. I stayed up for another hour, watching. Nothing else happened. The next morning, I checked the recorded clip. It had saved the event. Same distortion, same 5-second skip. I started checking older footage. Scrolled back through the past week. There were more. Not many, but a few. Same pattern. Always late at night, always 5 seconds missing. Always that stretch. I hadn't noticed them before. They were easy to miss if you weren't looking. I started paying more attention after that, watching the live feed more often. Most nights, nothing happened, just normal recordings. But every few days, there'd be another one. Same distortion, same missing time. I never saw anything in the frame. Nothing that caused it. Just the effect. Like something passing through space the camera could see, but not capture. I haven't found an explanation for it. The camera still works fine. No issues during the day, no problems with other recordings, just those moments, late at night, 5 seconds gone, and the image stretching like something moved through it. I noticed it because the air stopped feeling like air. I'd gone camping alone, about an hour outside town, in a patch of woodland I'd been to a few times before. Nothing remote enough to get lost in, but quiet enough that you don't see anyone once you're off the main trail. It was early autumn. Cold night, but dry. No rain, no fog, just still, clear air. I'd set up the tent just before dark, had something to eat, then sat out for a while listening to the usual sounds. Leaves shifting, branches creaking slightly, the occasional distant movement deeper in the woods. Normal. That's why it stood out when it stopped. I was sitting on one of those small fold-out stools, just staring into the dark between the trees when everything went quiet. Not gradually. All at once. The leaves stopped moving. The faint background noise dropped out. Even the wind, what little there was, just cut. I remember thinking it was strange, but not enough to worry about yet. Then the air changed. It felt heavier. Not thicker exactly, just like there was more of it. Like the space around me had increased in pressure. My ears picked it up first. That subtle feeling you get when you're going up or down a hill too fast. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I stood up slowly, looking around. The trees were still, completely still. No movement anywhere. I listened. Nothing. No insects. No distant sounds. Just silence. I stepped a little away from the tent. The ground felt the same. Everything looked normal. But the air, it felt wrong, like it was pressing in slightly from all sides. I took a slow breath. Even that felt different. Not harder, just noticeable. I turned in a slow circle, trying to pick out anything that had changed. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, a faint distortion between the trees, like heat haze. But there was no heat. It was cold enough that my breath showed faintly. The distortion moved, slowly, not drifting like fog, more like it was passing through, a ripple. That's the closest I can get to it. A subtle shimmer moving through the trees, bending the lines of branches and trunks as it passed. I stayed still, watching it. It didn't have a clear shape, just a section of the woods where things didn't look right. The trunks looked slightly warped. The gaps between branches shifted, then returned to normal as it moved past. It didn't make a sound, didn't disturb anything physically, leaves didn't move, branches didn't shake, just the visual distortion. It moved from left to right, slow, steady. I felt the pressure in my ears increase slightly as it got closer. I swallowed again, no change. I didn't move, didn't want to. The shimmer reached the area just beyond my tent. For a moment, I thought it was going to pass right through me, but it shifted slightly, changed its path just enough to avoid where I was standing. That's what made it feel worse, like it had adjusted, not randomly, on purpose. It continued past, the distortion moving through the trees behind me now. I turned slowly to follow it. It didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just kept that same steady movement. The pressure in the air started to ease slightly as it moved away. The shimmer grew fainter, harder to see until it was gone. The trees returned to normal, perfectly still. For a few seconds, nothing changed. Then, the wind came back. Light at first, leaves started moving again. The background noise returned, gradually, like someone had turned it back on. I stood there for a while, just listening, trying to process what I'd seen. Everything felt normal again. The air didn't have that weight anymore. My ears felt fine. I walked back toward the tent. Stopped just before reaching it, looked at the space where the shimmer had passed. Nothing. Just ground and trees. I crouched down, touched the ground, cold, damp, normal. I stood up again, looked around, no sign of anything. I thought about packing up and leaving right then, but it was dark, and the path out isn't great at night, so I stayed. Got into the tent, zipped it up, lay there, listening. Every sound felt louder after that. Every shift in the leaves, every creak. I didn't sleep much. Kept expecting something else to happen. Nothing did. Morning came normally, light filtering through the trees, everything looking exactly how it should. I packed up and left. Walked back to the car. The woods felt normal again. No pressure, no silence, just the usual sounds. I went back there a couple weeks later. Same spot, same time of evening. Nothing happened. Everything normal. But now, when I'm out in the woods, if the air suddenly goes quiet, I pay attention because I don't think that shimmer was random, and I don't think it passed through by accident. I noticed it because the light came from the wrong place. I'd woken up early without an alarm, which isn't normal for me. It was one of those mornings where your eyes just open and you're awake straight away. I checked my phone, 5:18 a.m., still dark outside. I lay there for a minute, then got up and went to the kitchen. My place backs onto open fields, so the window over the sink gives a clear view out toward the horizon. I remember thinking it should have been starting to get light soon. I made a cup of coffee and stood by the window, just looking out. The sky was flat and dark, a few clouds scattered low, nothing unusual. Then the light appeared. Not across the horizon, not spreading out the way sunrise does. It was vertical, a narrow band of pale light rising straight up from the ground, somewhere out in the fields. At first, I thought it was a reflection in the glass, something inside the kitchen catching the window at a weird angle. So I moved slightly to the side. The band stayed in the same place outside. I stepped closer to the window. It didn't look like light hitting something. It looked like the sky itself was brighter in that one strip, like someone had cut a clean line upward and filled it with early morning light. Everything else around it stayed dark. I stood there, coffee in my hand, trying to make sense of it. The band didn't widen, didn't spread, it just held steady, perfectly vertical. I checked the time again, 5:20. I looked back up. The light was still there, unchanged. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hand on the counter. The fields were dark, no buildings out there, no towers, nothing that could be casting something like that. The band reached high into the sky, faded slightly near the top, but still clearly defined. I stepped away from the window and walked into the living room. There's another window there that faces the same direction, but at a slightly different angle. I looked out through that one. The band was still visible. Same position, same shape. That ruled out it being something on the glass. I went back into the kitchen. The light hadn't moved. I started to feel that quiet unease then. Not fear, just confusion that didn't have anywhere to settle. I opened the back door and stepped outside. Cold air hit me straight away. The ground was damp, probably from overnight dew. I walked a few steps out onto the grass. The light looked the same from outside, maybe clearer. The edges were sharp, too sharp, not like natural light spreading through atmosphere, just a clean boundary. I stood there, listening. No wind, no birds, nothing. Just silence. I looked up along the length of the band. It seemed to stretch higher than it should have. Like it wasn't just part of the sky, more like something cutting through it. I took another step forward. The light didn't change, didn't react, just stayed there. I checked my phone again, 5:21. I remember thinking it should have started spreading by now. That's how sunrise works. It creeps in, fills the horizon, softens everything. This wasn't doing that. It was just there. Then it shifted. Not sideways, not downward, up. The bottom of the band began to retract, slowly at first, the light pulling upward like it was being drawn back into the sky. The fields below it stayed dark. I watched it, not moving. The vertical strip shortened, the bottom edge rising higher and higher. It didn't flicker, didn't change brightness, just reduced in length. I took a step back without realizing. The air felt heavier, like the space around me had tightened. The light continued to retract. Now it was only halfway up, then higher, until it was just a narrow segment suspended above the horizon. Then it disappeared, not fading, not dimming, just gone. The sky went back to normal, dark, with the first real signs of dawn starting to show along the horizon. I stood there for a few seconds staring at where it had been. Nothing. Just the usual gradual light now. Birds started making noise again, faint at first, then more. I walked back inside, set the cup down on the counter. My hands felt colder than they should have. I checked the time, 5:23. That didn't seem right. It had felt longer. I stayed in the kitchen, watching the sky as it brightened properly this time. Normal sunrise. Soft light spreading across the horizon, everything how it should be. Later that day, I walked out into the fields, followed the direction where I'd seen the band. There was nothing out there. No structures, no marks, just open ground. I stood there for a bit, trying to line up where it had been. Couldn't find anything. That evening, I mentioned it to my neighbor Claire. She just shook her head, said she hadn't seen anything. I didn't push it. But the next morning, I woke up early again. Around the same time, stood in the kitchen, watched the horizon, everything normal. No vertical light, just the slow, even spread of dawn. But now, every morning when I wake up before sunrise, I check that same spot, just to see if the sky does it again. I noticed it because the fire stopped making noise. Not went out, just stopped sounding like a fire. I was sitting there on this cheap folding chair, half wrapped in a sleeping bag, watching the flames and not really thinking about anything. It was late, maybe just past midnight. I'd hiked out earlier that day and set up in this small clearing about a mile off the trail. My name's Lewis. I don't camp a lot, but I'd gone out there to clear my head after a rough week. No signal, no other people, just trees. There had been a steady breeze all evening. Nothing strong, just enough to keep the leaves moving and the fire flickering. Then it stopped, not gradually, just cut off. The leaves froze in place. The flames dropped lower, like they'd lost something. And the sound, the constant crackling and shifting, just disappeared. The fire was still burning. I could see it, but it wasn't making noise. I remember leaning forward trying to listen harder, like maybe my ears had popped or something. Nothing. No wind, no insects, no distant sounds at all. It felt like someone had muted everything. I stood up slowly, scanning the trees around me. They weren't moving, not even slightly. The air felt wrong, thicker somehow. I took a few steps away from the fire, boots pressing into the dirt louder than they should have been. That's when I noticed the smell, or lack of it. The fire should have smelled strong, especially that close. But I couldn't smell anything. No smoke, no burning wood, just nothing. I turned back toward the fire, crouched down, held my hand near it. I could feel the heat. So it was real. Everything was real, just disconnected. I straightened up again, and that's when I saw it. Not clearly, just movement, out in the trees, maybe 20 or 30 meters away. At first, I thought the wind had picked back up. The branches shifted slightly, but it wasn't like wind. It was more like a ripple, like something invisible was moving through them, pushing them aside in a smooth, steady motion. It started on my left, a faint disturbance in the leaves, then it moved across the tree line. Not fast, not slow, just steady, like a wave. I stood there, not moving, watching it. The trees didn't react the way they should have. They didn't sway or rustle. They just parted slightly as it passed, then returned to stillness. The ripple moved closer. I could see it better now. Not a shape, more like a distortion, like the air itself was bending. It reminded me of heat haze, but thicker, more defined, and it was coming toward the clearing. I took a step back without thinking. My foot scraped the ground. I didn't hear it. I felt it, but there was no sound. That's when my chest tightened a bit. Not panic, just that realization that something wasn't right. The ripple reached the edge of the clearing. The trees there shifted slightly, then stilled again. The distortion entered the open space, and I could see it properly. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a person, but not shaped like one, just a vertical stretch of warped air moving forward. I held my breath. It kept moving, straight across the clearing, toward me. The firelight passed through it oddly, not bending like you'd expect, more like it dimmed slightly where it crossed. I took another step back. Still no sound. The world felt completely cut off. The ripple stopped, right at the edge of the firelight, maybe 10 feet away from me. It stayed there, not moving. The air around it seemed to shift slightly, like it was adjusting. I didn't know what to do. Running didn't feel like an option. Standing there didn't feel much better. I glanced down at my watch. The screen was blank. It should have been lit. I tapped it. Nothing. I looked back up. The distortion was still there, but it had changed slightly. Not moved. Just narrowed, like it was focusing. I felt that same pressure in my ears then. Low, dull, building slowly. I swallowed, trying to clear it. Didn't help. The ripple moved again, closer, into the firelight. And for a second, I thought I could see something inside it, not clearly, just a suggestion of shape, like something was there but not fully visible. It shifted slightly, then stopped again. I didn't move, didn't even breathe properly. The pressure in my ears peaked. Then, everything snapped back. The wind returned. All at once, leaves rustling, fire crackling, the normal sounds rushing in like they'd been waiting. The distortion vanished completely. Nothing left, just the clearing, the trees, the fire. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to process it. My watch flickered back on, 12:17. I checked it again a minute later, 12:18. That didn't make sense. It felt like longer had passed. I looked around the clearing. Everything looked normal, but something felt off. I walked over to where the ripple had stopped. The ground looked the same, no marks, no disturbance, but the air felt colder there, just slightly. I stayed up the rest of the night. Didn't sit down again, just stood near the fire watching the trees. Nothing else happened. At first light, I packed up. Didn't take my time. Just got everything together and headed back to the trail. As I was leaving the clearing, I turned around once. The trees were moving normally in the breeze. Everything looked exactly how it should have. But for a second, just at the edge of the tree line, I thought I saw that same ripple again. Faint, barely there, moving away. Then it was gone. I noticed it when I shifted my feet. I was standing near the middle of the boat, just adjusting my stance because the floor had started to feel colder through my boots. It was one of those quiet nights out on the reservoir. No wind, water like glass. You could hear every small movement. The creak of the boat, the line tapping against the rod. I'd been out there for maybe an hour already. No bites, but I didn't mind. I go out more for the quiet than anything. My name's Aaron, by the way. I usually fish alone, especially at night. Less hassle, no one talking. Anyway, I looked down when I shifted my feet, and that's when I saw it. A faint glow under the boat. Not bright, just enough to notice against the dark water. At first, I thought it was my headlamp, reflecting somehow. I had it around my neck, not switched on, but sometimes it catches light weirdly. So I turned it on and pointed it down. The glow didn't change. Still there. Soft, kind of white, but not really. More like a pale gray light, if that makes sense. I leaned over the side, trying to see better. The water was clear enough that night, but I couldn't make out anything beneath it. Just that glow, sitting under the boat. I straightened up and turned the lamp off again. The glow stayed. I told myself it was probably something in the water, maybe algae or some kind of reflection from the sky, even though there wasn't much moon. I picked up my rod again, tried to ignore it, but every few seconds I found myself looking down. It wasn't moving, just staying right under me. After a minute or two, I realized something else. The boat was drifting. Slowly, but it was moving. I could tell from the shoreline, the way the trees were shifting slightly in relation to me. But the glow, it stayed centered, right beneath the middle of the boat. I tested it. I stepped toward the front. The glow moved with me. Not instantly, just slightly delayed, like it had to catch up. I froze for a second, then stepped back. Same thing. It followed. That's when it stopped feeling like something natural. I grabbed my phone, thinking I'd record it. The screen lit up, reflected faintly on the water. But when I pointed the camera down, I couldn't see the glow properly, just darkness and a bit of reflection from the phone itself. I lowered the phone, looked with my eyes, still there. I tried again, nothing on the camera. That made me uneasy. I put the phone away and just stood there, watching. The glow didn't pulse or flicker. It was steady, and the longer I looked, the more it felt like it wasn't lighting the water. It was just existing in it, like it didn't interact with anything around it. I crouched down, bringing my face closer to the surface. The air felt colder near the water. I could hear a faint sound then, not from above, from below. A low, dull hum, barely there. I held my breath, trying to focus on it. It wasn't constant. It sort of came and went, like it was rising and falling slowly. I straightened up again, suddenly aware of how alone I was out there. No other boats, no lights on the shore nearby. Just me, and that glow. I reached for the oar and pushed against the water, trying to move the boat more deliberately. It slid sideways. The shoreline shifted faster this time, but the glow stayed with me. Still centered, still under the boat. That's when I noticed the temperature change. Not around me. In the water. Where the glow was, the surface looked slightly disturbed, not rippling, just different, like it was thicker somehow. I don't know how else to describe it. I leaned over again, watching closely. The glow seemed to deepen slightly, not brighter, just more defined, like it was coming from further below. The hum got stronger for a second, then faded again. I pulled back, suddenly not wanting to be that close to it. I sat down on the bench, keeping my eyes on the water, trying to think of something normal that could explain it. Nothing came to mind. I checked the time on my phone, 11:26 p.m. I remember that clearly because I checked it again later. I decided I'd just leave, pack up, head back to shore. I reeled in my line, hands moving slower than usual. Every now and then I'd glance down. Still there, still following. I picked up the oar again and started rowing properly this time. The boat moved forward, cutting through the water. The glow stayed with me, perfectly centered. It didn't lag this time, just stayed exactly under the boat no matter how I moved. That made it worse, because now it felt like it was tracking me. Not reacting, tracking. I rowed faster. The hum returned. Stronger now. Still low, but more noticeable. I could feel it faintly in my feet through the floor of the boat. I looked down again. The glow had changed slightly, not in brightness, in shape. It wasn't just a soft circle anymore. There was something uneven about it, like parts of it were shifting within the light, not moving exactly, just rearranging. I stopped rowing for a second. The boat drifted, the glow stayed, the hum steadied. I felt that same heaviness in the air I've felt a few times since, like everything was slightly out of sync. I didn't stay still for long. I started rowing again, harder this time. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just wanted to get back to shore. The glow didn't fade, didn't change. It stayed with me the entire way, all the way until I was close enough to see the outline of the dock. That's when it shifted. Not suddenly, just moved slightly deeper. like it was sinking. The hum dropped with it, lower, fainter. I kept rowing, didn't slow down. As the boat scraped lightly against the edge of the dock, the glow dimmed, not fading out, just pulling away, like it was retreating into the water. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed my gear, stepped onto the dock, looked back once. The water was dark again, nothing there. No glow, no movement, just the reflection of the sky. I checked the time when I got to the car, 11:49. That didn't feel right. It should have taken longer to get back. I sat there for a minute, engine off, just listening. Everything sounded normal again. No hum, no pressure. I haven't been back out there at night since, but a couple of weeks later, I was there during the day. Same spot, same part of the water. And when I looked over the side, just for a second, I thought I saw something pale shift beneath the surface, right where the boat would have been. The power went out while I was halfway through making tea. Everything just cut at once. Lights, kettle, the quiet hum of the fridge. The house dropped into silence so suddenly it felt like something had been pulled out of it. I stood there for a second, hands still on the counter. Right, I said quietly. It wasn't unusual for the power to go out where I lived. Small village, older lines. It usually came back within a few minutes. I grabbed my phone. No signal. That was less normal. I walked into the living room and pulled the curtain back. The whole street was dark. No porch lights, no street lamps, just the faint outline of houses and parked cars under a low, heavy sky. Clouds hung thick overhead. No stars. I leaned slightly closer to the glass. That's when I noticed the glow. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, a faint patch in the clouds, but it didn't look like light bleeding through from anywhere. It was contained, circular, soft-edged, just sitting there above the rooftops. I frowned and stepped outside. The air was cool still. A few doors down, someone else had come out. I could hear a voice, low, talking to someone I couldn't see. "Power's gone again," they said. I didn't respond. I was looking at the sky. The glow stayed in place. It didn't flicker, didn't spread. Just a soft circle, barely brighter than the clouds around it. I took a few steps onto the pavement. The gravel crunched under my shoes, too loud in the quiet. I looked around briefly. No one else seemed to be looking up. I turned back to the sky. The glow was still there. Same size, same intensity. I tried to judge its distance. It didn't make sense. It looked close, but also far. Like it wasn't sitting in the clouds, but behind them, or inside them. I swallowed. The air felt heavier. I became aware of a faint pressure in my ears. Subtle, but noticeable. I tilted my head slightly, trying to clear it. It didn't change. I stepped further into the street. The glow didn't move, didn't react. It just existed. I waited for it to grow or shift or do anything. It didn't. The edges stayed soft, the center slightly brighter, but it didn't illuminate anything. The clouds around it stayed dark. The houses below remained in shadow. It was like it wasn't casting light at all, just showing itself. I glanced back toward my house. The windows were dark, everything still. I looked up again. The glow remained, unchanged. Then, slowly, it began to fade. Not outward, not spreading, just dimming. The circle stayed the same size. The edges stayed the same shape, but the brightness dropped, evenly, like someone turning a dial. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. I took a step back. The glow continued to fade, still not moving, still not spreading, just becoming less. I stood there watching it, waiting for something else. Nothing came. After a few seconds, it was barely visible. Then, gone. The clouds returned to their normal dull gray. Nothing in them, no trace of the shape. I kept looking at the same spot, trying to see it again. Nothing. A second later, the streetlights flickered on, one by one. Then the houses. Lights returning behind windows, the quiet hum of electricity coming back, the normal sounds of the street creeping in again. I blinked, looked around. Everything felt normal, too normal. "Back on," someone called from down the road. "Yeah," another voice answered. I looked up one last time. The sky was just clouds again. No glow, no shape. I stood there for another minute, then turned and went back inside. The kettle had reset. I turned it back on. The familiar sound filled the kitchen. I leaned against the counter, staring at nothing for a moment. Then I glanced out the window again, just clouds. But for a second, I had this strange thought that whatever that shape had been, hadn't been lighting the clouds. It had been behind them. I was about halfway through the drive when my headlights dimmed. Not completely off, just dipped, like something passed in front of them for a second. The road ahead went darker than it should have been, like the beam got swallowed up. Then it snapped back to normal. I slowed down a bit, instinctively, even though there was nothing there. No car, no animal, nothing crossing the road. I was on a stretch of road outside Hexham, heading back toward Newcastle. It was late, around 1:30 a.m., and the weather had turned earlier. Light rain, not heavy, but enough to make the road shine under the headlights. There weren't many streetlights out there, just long gaps of dark between the occasional dim orange ones. I remember glancing at my dashboard, thinking maybe something flickered with the battery or the lights themselves. Everything looked fine, so I kept driving. About 30 seconds later, it happened again. This time it lasted longer. The headlights dimmed, and the road ahead didn't just get darker. It felt like it disappeared, like the beam stopped reaching as far as it should. I could still see the immediate road in front of me, but beyond that, it was just black. Not normal night darkness. Heavier. I slowed down more, easing my foot off the accelerator. "Come on," I muttered, like the car could hear me. Then it snapped back again, full brightness, wet road reflecting the light like normal. I exhaled and gave a small laugh, mostly to calm myself down. Electrical issue, I thought. Old car, weird wiring, something like that. Still, I didn't speed back up. A few minutes passed without anything happening. The road curved slightly, lined with trees on both sides. Their branches leaned over in places, forming these dark tunnels where even the weak streetlights didn't reach. I started to relax a bit. Then I noticed something else. The sound. The rain had been lightly tapping against the windshield the whole time. Not loud, just steady. But at some point, it stopped. I didn't notice exactly when. I only realized because the silence felt wrong. I flicked my eyes up at the windshield. The wipers were still moving, slow and steady, but there was nothing for them to clear. No droplets, no streaks. The glass was dry. I glanced at the side mirrors. The road behind me still looked wet. I could see the faint sheen under my taillights. But ahead of me, it was dry, completely. I felt that same tightness in my chest again. I pressed the accelerator a little, wanting to get out of that stretch of road. That's when the headlights dimmed a third time. This time, they didn't come back right away. The beam shortened again, cutting off a few meters in front of the car. Everything beyond that was just gone. Like the road ended in darkness. I slowed almost to a crawl. My hands were tight on the wheel now. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see further ahead, like that would help. And then I saw it. Not clearly, just a shape. Something darker than the darkness, right at the edge of where the headlights stopped. It wasn't solid. Not like a person or an animal. More like a distortion, like heat rising off asphalt in the summer. Except it was night and cold. It stayed in place as I moved forward, or maybe I was moving toward it. I couldn't tell. The ringing in my ears started then, quiet at first, but noticeable. Same high-pitched tone you get from electronics sometimes, but there was nothing around. I eased my foot onto the brake. The car slowed even more. The shape didn't move. It didn't react. It just stayed there, right where the light ended. I felt this strong urge to stop completely. Not panic, not fear exactly, just this pull to not get any closer. But I was already too close. The car rolled forward another few feet. The headlights flickered, and for a split second, everything went completely dark. Not just ahead of me. Everything. No dashboard lights, no headlights, nothing. Just black. Then it all came back at once. The headlights were full brightness again. The dashboard lit up, the road stretched out ahead like normal, and the shape was gone. I hit the accelerator without thinking, pushing the car faster than I should have on a wet road, or what should have been a wet road. I glanced at the windshield again, still dry. The wipers kept moving uselessly, squeaking slightly now against the glass. I reached over and turned them off. The silence got heavier. No rain, no wiper noise, just the engine and that faint ringing, still there, just under everything. I checked the time, 1:47 a.m. That didn't seem right. I was sure it hadn't been that long since the first flicker. Maybe a few minutes, 10 at most. I tried to think back, to piece together how much time had actually passed, but it felt slippery. Like trying to remember a dream right after waking up. I kept driving. A few more minutes passed, and then I saw headlights coming toward me in the opposite lane. A car, finally. Relief hit me harder than I expected. As the car got closer, I slowed slightly, watching it. It looked normal, just a hatchback, nothing unusual. But as it passed me, something felt off. The driver didn't look at me, not in the usual way people glance as they pass. He just stared straight ahead, completely still. And his headlights, they dimmed as they passed my car, same way mine had. Just for a second, I checked my mirrors quickly. The car kept going, taillights steady, no sign of anything wrong. I turned my attention back to the road ahead. The rain started again, light at first, then steady, tapping softly against the windshield. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Everything looked normal again. Wet road, full headlights, trees lining the sides. The ringing in my ears faded slowly until it was gone. I drove the rest of the way home without anything else happening. When I pulled into my driveway, I just sat there for a minute, engine running, staring at nothing. Eventually, I turned the car off and went inside. The next morning, I went back out to check the car. I don't know what I expected to find. Probably nothing. But when I looked at the headlights, I noticed something. Both of them had a faint smear across the glass. Not dirt, not water spots, just a thin, dull streak right across the center of each one. Same height, same position, like something had passed directly in front of them. I woke up because my phone was warm in my hand. I don't fall asleep holding it. I always leave it on the nightstand. But when I came to, it was pressed against my palm like I'd been gripping it. The screen was on, not bright, just dim, like it had been on for a while. I blinked a few times trying to focus, and that's when I noticed it was recording. Voice memo app. Red bar moving across the top. Timer counting up. I stared at that number for a second, trying to make sense of it. 2 hours, 13 minutes. I definitely hadn't started recording anything. I hit stop. The timer froze. For a moment, I just sat there in bed, looking at the screen, waiting for something else to happen. My room was still dark. Faint early morning light just starting to come through the curtains. It had that quiet, heavy feeling right before sunrise. I checked the time. 5:26 a.m. I tried to remember when I'd gone to sleep. Around midnight, maybe a little after. I didn't remember waking up at any point. I looked back at the recording. There was only one file. Saved automatically. No name, just the timestamp. I hesitated before playing it. I don't know why. It's just a recording. But something about waking up to it already running felt wrong. Still, I tapped it. For the first few seconds, there was nothing. Just that faint background noise you get from a phone mic. Then the hum started. Low, steady. Not loud, but constant. Like a distant engine, except smoother. No vibration to it, just a flat tone that didn't change. I turned the volume up slightly. The hum stayed exactly the same, no variation, no pattern. I listened for a minute, maybe longer, nothing else. Then, right near the end, there was a sound. A single metallic tap. Sharp. Quick. Like something small hitting a hard surface, and then it went back to just the hum. The recording ended a few seconds later. I sat there for a while, replaying that part over and over. The tap didn't sound like anything in my room. Not my phone, not the bed frame, not anything I recognized. I looked around. Everything was normal. Door closed, window shut, nothing out of place. I checked my call history, thinking maybe I'd accidentally called someone or something had triggered the recording. Nothing. No missed calls. No outgoing. I got out of bed and checked the rest of the house. I live alone. Small place just outside Keswick, kind of on the edge of a wooded area. It's quiet out there, especially early in the morning. Kitchen was empty, back door still locked, nothing disturbed. I stood there for a minute listening. No hum, just the normal quiet. I went back upstairs, picked up my phone again, and played the recording one more time. Same thing. Low hum. Then the tap. That was it. I noticed something else then. There was a gap at the start of the recording. The timer said over 2 hours, but the actual audio only lasted about 30 minutes. The rest was just blank. No sound at all. I scrubbed through it, moving the timeline back and forth. For the first hour and 40 minutes, there was nothing. Completely silent. Then, suddenly, the hum started. No build-up, no fade-in, just there. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to think. Maybe I'd turned it on in my sleep. That happens, right? People do stuff like that. But why would it be silent for that long? And what was the hum? I got dressed and went downstairs again, made some coffee, tried to distract myself. But I kept thinking about it. After a while, I decided to check outside. It was fully morning by then. Gray sky, low clouds hanging over the hills. The ground was damp from overnight mist, but not full rain. I stepped out into the garden. Everything looked normal. Fence, shed, the line of trees at the back, nothing unusual. I walked toward the shed, mostly just to give myself something to do. Halfway there, I noticed something on the ground, a small dent in the grass. Not deep, just a slight depression like something had pressed down for a moment. It was round, about the size of a dinner plate. I stood over it, looking down. The grass inside the circle looked flattened but not broken, just pushed down evenly. I glanced around, checking for anything else like it. There were two more, all in a rough line, spaced a few feet apart, leading toward the back fence. I followed them slowly, each one the same size, same shape, same shallow depression. They stopped right at the fence. I looked up. The trees beyond were still, no wind, no movement. I stood there for a minute, just listening. And then, for a second, I thought I heard it again. The hum. Faint. Barely there. I held my breath, trying to catch it. It faded almost immediately. I went back inside. The rest of the day felt off. Not in a dramatic way, just small things. My phone battery drained faster than usual. The kitchen clock was a couple minutes ahead of my phone, even though I'd synced them recently. Stuff like that. Nothing I could point to and say, yeah, something's definitely wrong. That night, I made sure to leave my phone on the desk, not the nightstand. I closed the door fully. Checked the windows twice. I went to bed around the same time as usual. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. Same way. Phone in my hand, screen dimly lit, recording. This time the timer read 47:12. I stopped it immediately. My chest felt tight again, same as the morning before. I didn't play it right away. I sat there for a while, just holding the phone, staring at the screen. Eventually, I tapped it. The hum started almost immediately this time. Same tone, same steady, flat sound, no variation. I skipped ahead. There was no silence at the beginning, just the hum, continuous. And then, near the end, the tap again. But this time it was closer, louder, like it had happened right next to the phone. I replayed it twice, maybe 3 times. Each time, it sounded the same. Hum. Tap. End. I looked at my hand. I was holding the phone the same way as before, tight, like I'd been gripping it in my sleep. I didn't go back to bed after that. I stayed up until morning, sitting in the kitchen with the lights on. When it got light outside, I went back into the garden. The dents were still there, but there was a new one. Closer to the house, just a few feet from the back door. Same size, same shape, perfectly round. I noticed the compass before I noticed anything else. It was subtle at first, just a slight wobble in the needle when I checked it, like it hadn't settled properly. I tapped the casing with my finger, thinking it was just stuck. It didn't snap back like it should. It drifted, not wildly. Just a slow, steady movement off north, then back, then off again. I frowned and held it still in my hand. "Come on," I muttered. I was on a ridge path in the Peak District, somewhere above a dale. Not a difficult hike, just a long one. I'd started late afternoon, planning to catch the sunset and head back before it got too dark. The weather had been clear earlier, but by the time I reached the ridge, the sky had turned that dull gray blue you get just before night fully sets in. No wind, which was strange in itself up there. I checked the compass again. The needle was still drifting, not spinning, just refusing to settle. I looked up, scanning the horizon. Nothing unusual. Rolling hills, darkening sky, no lights anywhere. I pulled my phone out and checked the map. Signal was weak, but still there. Location looked right. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking. The path was narrow, gravel underfoot, dropping off on either side into darker slopes. I glanced at the compass again. Still off. Probably just interference, I said to myself. Didn't really know what would cause it out there, but it sounded reasonable enough. I kept moving. A few minutes passed. The light dropped further. That soft blue-gray turning into something darker. I slowed slightly, more out of habit than anything. That's when I noticed the silence. Not complete silence, but thinner, like something had been pulled out of the air. No wind, still. But even the distant sounds you usually get, birds, maybe a far-off car, weren't there. Just my footsteps and my breathing. I stopped walking, stood still, listened. Nothing. I checked the compass again. The needle had drifted further now. pointing somewhere between north and east, but not quite either. I turned slowly in place, watching it. It didn't adjust the way it should. It lagged behind my movement, then slid slightly past where it should have stopped. I swallowed. All right. I looked up again. The horizon line was still clear, dark shapes of hills against a slightly lighter sky. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel right. I took a few more steps along the ridge. The gravel crunched under my boots, louder than it should have been. Each step felt too sharp in the quiet. I checked the compass again, still drifting, not correcting. I stopped again. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint, barely there. Just above the horizon, slightly to my left, a soft pulse. Not bright, just enough to notice. It lasted maybe a second. Then it was gone. I blinked, staring at the spot. Nothing, just the dark line of the hills. I stood there, waiting. Nothing happened. I told myself it was just something distant. A car, maybe. Light reflecting off something. Didn't make sense, but it was something. I started walking again, slower now, more aware. The silence pressed in a bit more. I became aware of my breathing again, too loud. I tried to breathe quieter, didn't help. I checked the compass. The needle had shifted again, now pointing somewhere else entirely, not even close to north. I stopped, turned in a slow circle. The needle followed, but not correctly. It moved like it was delayed, like it was catching up. I felt a tightness in my chest. I looked back toward where I'd come from. The path was still there. Faint, but visible. I could head back. Probably should. I turned slightly, angling my body that way. The compass needle slid again, then stopped, pointing directly ahead, not north, just ahead. I frowned. That wasn't how it should work. I lifted it higher, holding it steady. The needle didn't move. I lowered it, still fixed. I looked up. The horizon in front of me looked the same as before, but something felt off, like the distance was wrong, like it was closer than it should be. I took a step forward, then another. The silence deepened. Even my footsteps sounded duller now, less sharp. I glanced back again. The path behind me looked slightly blurred. Not visibly, exactly, just harder to focus on. I turned back toward the front. That's when the glow came again. Same spot, just above the horizon. A soft pulse, brighter this time, still not illuminating anything around it, just existing. It held for a fraction longer, then faded. Gone. I stopped walking. My hands felt cold. I checked the compass again. The needle was still pointing forward, unmoving. I turned slowly to the right. The needle didn't follow. It stayed fixed. I turned further. It still didn't move. It was no longer responding to direction. It was locked. I looked up again. The horizon felt closer now. I couldn't explain it. The shape of the hills hadn't changed, but the distance felt reduced, like something had shifted. I took a step back. The needle didn't move. I took another. The silence stayed. Heavy, pressing. I turned fully around. The path behind me looked normal again. Clearer. More solid. I didn't think about it. I just started walking back. Faster now. Not running, but close. The gravel crunched louder again. The sound returned slightly. Not fully, but enough. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes on the path. After a few minutes, I checked the compass again. The needle snapped. Suddenly. Back to north. Steady. Normal. I stopped, turned slowly. It followed correctly this time. No drift, no delay. I let out a breath. I hadn't realized I'd been holding it. I looked back toward the horizon. No glow, no change. Just dark hills. The silence lifted gradually. Wind returned, faint at first, then more noticeable. I stood there for a minute, then kept walking back. When I reached the lower part of the trail, the air felt normal again. Sounds came back fully. Distant cars, wind through grass, everything. I didn't stop until I reached the car park. When I got there, I checked the compass one more time. Perfectly steady, pointing north, like nothing had happened. But when I looked up at the ridge one last time, the horizon line seemed further away than I remembered. I got stuck at that crossing more times than I could count. It was on a back road just outside of town, the kind of place where trains passed through at random hours, and you'd end up waiting even when you couldn't see or hear anything coming. That night, it was just after midnight. I'd left work late and was taking the usual route home. The roads were empty, no other cars around, just the occasional streetlight and long stretches of darkness in between. It had been drizzling earlier, and the road was still damp. The air had that quiet, heavy feel to it, like everything was holding still. I came up to the crossing and saw the red lights already flashing. No barriers on this one, just the lights and the crossbuck sign. They blinked steadily, casting that red wash across the wet road. I slowed and rolled to a stop a few feet before the tracks. I turned the radio down. Habit. You listen for the train. Usually you'd hear it before you saw it. The low rumble, the horn, something. But there was nothing. Just the ticking of my engine and the steady click of the crossing lights. I leaned forward slightly, looking down the tracks in both directions. Empty. No headlights. No movement. I sat back in the seat and waited. After maybe a minute, I started to get that familiar annoyance. You know, when you're stuck waiting and there's clearly nothing coming. I glanced at the time on the dashboard. 12:17. The red lights kept flashing, still no sound. I tapped the steering wheel lightly with my fingers. Another minute passed. Then I noticed the glow. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of the crossing lights on the wet rails, but it didn't match the rhythm. It was steady, white, and it was coming from farther down the tracks, maybe 50 yards ahead. I leaned forward again. The glow hovered just above the rails. Not high, maybe a couple feet off the ground. It didn't spread out like normal light. It was contained, like a soft ball of brightness that didn't quite reach the surrounding area. I squinted, trying to see what was causing it. No shape I could make out. Just that white glow sitting there. The red crossing lights kept flashing behind me, reflecting faintly off it. I waited for it to move. It didn't. The road around me felt quieter than before. I realized I couldn't hear anything beyond the clicking of the crossing signal. No wind, no distant cars, nothing. I reached over and turned the radio knob just to check. No sound, not even static. I frowned and tapped it. Still nothing. The glow pulsed slightly, not bright enough to hurt your eyes. Just a soft shift like it was breathing. I felt a pressure in my ears, sudden, sharp. I swallowed, trying to clear it. It didn't go away. It felt like being in an airplane when the cabin pressure changes too fast. I shifted in my seat. The air inside the car felt thicker. Hard to describe, not like I couldn't breathe. Just like the space itself had weight to it. I looked back at the glow. It seemed closer. Not by much, but enough that I noticed. I blinked a few times. It stayed where it was. I gripped the steering wheel. My fingers felt slightly numb. That same pins and needles feeling, but duller. The crossing lights kept flashing. Red, on, off, on, off. The timing felt slower now, or maybe I was just noticing it more. I looked down at the dashboard. The clock still read 12:17. The seconds weren't moving. I stared at it. It didn't change. The engine sound dropped, not off, just lower, like it was being muffled. I pressed the accelerator lightly. No change. The engine didn't respond. The glow pulsed again. This time the pressure in my ears spiked. I winced. For a second, everything felt slightly out of sync, like my body was lagging behind what I was seeing. I blinked. The glow was gone. Completely. The tracks ahead were empty again. Dark. Wet. Normal. The crossing lights were still flashing. The sound came back all at once. The click of the signal, the faint hum of something in the distance, even the soft hiss of tires on wet pavement far away. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. I looked down at the dashboard. The clock now read 12:24. I stared at it. 7 minutes. I didn't remember those minutes passing. I turned the key slightly, just to check. The engine cut. Then I tried to start it again. Nothing, just a dull click. I tried again. Same thing. The interior lights dimmed slightly with each attempt. I sat back. My hands were still tingling. I looked at the tracks again. Still empty. No train. No lights in the distance. The crossing lights kept flashing red. On. Off. On. Off. Another car didn't come up behind me. No one else stopped. It was just me sitting there. I tried the engine again. Click. Nothing. I waited. I don't know how long, maybe a couple minutes, maybe more. Then, without warning, the crossing lights stopped. Just like that. No slowing. No final flash. They just went dark. The silence felt bigger for a second. Then normal sound filled back in. I turned the key again. The engine started immediately. No hesitation. Like nothing had happened. I sat there for a second, then drove forward, crossing the tracks. As I passed over them, I glanced to the side. There was nothing there. No sign anything had been on the rails. I kept driving. The radio came back on, mid-song. I hadn't turned it back on. I checked the clock again, 12:25. It kept ticking normally now. When I got home, I sat in the car for a minute before going inside. The engine idled steady. Everything felt normal again. But for a few minutes out there, it hadn't. And the part that stuck with me wasn't just the light, it was how long I'd been sitting there without realizing it, and how the crossing lights had stayed red the entire time, even though nothing ever came. I went up to the roof because I couldn't sleep. It wasn't anything unusual. The building had a small access door at the top of the stairwell, and most people didn't bother with it. But it wasn't locked, and sometimes I'd go up there just to get some air and clear my head. That night, it was just after 2 in the morning. I remember checking my phone before I left my flat, 2:08. The city was quiet in that late night way. Not silent, but reduced. Traffic was lighter, fewer voices, just the distant hum of everything still running. The roof was flat with a low concrete wall around the edge. A few vents, some pipes, nothing else. From up there, you could see down into the street on one side and across to other buildings on the other. I stepped out and closed the door behind me. The air felt cool, but still. No wind at all. I walked over to the edge and leaned slightly against the wall, looking out across the buildings. Lights in some windows, others dark. A few cars moving in the distance. Everything looked normal. I stayed there for a couple minutes, just standing, letting things settle. Then I noticed the light. It wasn't in the sky. It was between buildings, low, at about the same height as the rooftop I was standing on, maybe a little lower. It hovered in the gap between 2 apartment blocks across the street, maybe 50 or 60 feet away. At first, I thought it was a drone. That was my first assumption, but it didn't blink. No red or green lights, just a steady white glow, and it wasn't moving, not even slightly. I straightened up and focused on it. The light was round, or at least it looked that way. Not perfectly defined, but contained. It didn't spill out onto the walls around it the way a spotlight would. It just sat there. I leaned forward a bit, trying to get a better angle. Nothing changed, no movement, no sound. That's when I realized how quiet it had gotten. The usual background noise of the city was gone. No cars, no distant voices, no hum from air conditioners or traffic, just nothing. I shifted my weight and listened. Still nothing. I took a step back from the edge. The sound of my shoe on the concrete felt muted, like it didn't carry. I looked back at the light. It pulsed once, soft, barely noticeable, but I felt it. A slight pressure in my ears, like a quick change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The air around me felt heavier, not thick enough to stop me breathing, just enough to notice. I rubbed my hands together. There was a faint tingling in my fingers. I looked back at the light. It hadn't moved. It just stayed fixed in that space between the buildings. I tried to look around it, see if there was anything behind it. The walls of the buildings were visible, but the light didn't seem to interact with them properly. It didn't cast shadows the way I expected. It didn't reflect normally. It was just there, separate. I took a few steps along the edge of the roof, trying to change my angle. The light stayed in the same relative position. No matter where I moved, it looked like it was facing me directly. That didn't make sense. I stopped. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. My chest felt tight, not panic, just a steady weight. I took a breath. It felt shallow, like the air wasn't moving the way it should. I looked back toward the stairwell door for a second. It felt further away than it should have. Not physically, just like it would take more effort to get there. I turned back to the light. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not a clear shape, just a darker section, like something was passing through it or behind it. Then it was gone. The light returned to being uniform. My ears popped again, sharper this time. I winced. The silence deepened. It felt like everything had been pressed down, flattened. Even my own breathing sounded distant. I raised a hand slightly, like I was going to wave or block it. I don't know why. My arm felt slow, not heavy, just delayed. The light pulsed again, stronger. The pressure in my chest spiked. I sucked in a breath. For a second, everything felt out of sync, like my body wasn't keeping up with what I was seeing. I blinked, and suddenly I was standing near the door, not at the edge anymore. My back was almost against the wall beside it. My hand was on the handle. I froze. I didn't remember walking there. I turned around slowly. The edge of the roof was a few steps away now. The buildings across the street looked normal. The gap between them was empty. No light, no glow, just darkness. The sound came back all at once. Cars in the distance, a faint siren somewhere far off, the usual low hum of the city. I stood there for a second trying to catch up. My chest still felt tight, but it was easing. My breathing returned to normal. I looked down at my hands. The tingling was fading. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen lit up. 3:19. I stared at it. That didn't make sense. I'd only been up there for a few minutes. It hadn't felt like more than 5 or 10. I checked again. 3:19. No missed notifications. No calls. Nothing that explained the time. I looked back out at the gap between the buildings. Nothing there. Just empty space and dark windows. I opened the door and went back inside. The stairwell felt normal. The sound of my steps echoed again. Everything was back to how it should be. When I got back to my flat, I checked the time again. 3:21. It kept moving forward normally. But that stretch on the roof didn't line up with it, and now, sometimes when I step outside late at night, I find myself looking between buildings without meaning to, just to see if anything is sitting there where it shouldn't be. I was in the hospital overnight with my dad. Nothing critical, just observation after a minor surgery, but they wanted someone to stay with him because he was still groggy from the anesthesia. The room was on the 6th floor, facing the back of the building. Not much to look at, just a parking structure, a few trees, and beyond that, the dark outline of other buildings. It was quiet in that way hospitals get at night. Not silent, but controlled. The steady beeping from the monitor next to his bed, the soft hum of the air system, the occasional distant footsteps in the corridor. I was sitting in one of those plastic chairs by the window, half awake, scrolling on my phone. It was around 2 a.m., maybe a little later. My dad was asleep. Deep, steady breathing. The monitor showed normal readings, heart rate, oxygen levels, all that. I remember checking the time, 2:17. Then I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was just a reflection in the glass, something from inside the room catching at the right angle. But when I shifted slightly, it stayed in the same place, outside, just beyond the window. I leaned forward a bit, squinting. It was bright. Not blinding, but stronger than anything else in the area. A steady white light, hovering at roughly the same height as the window, too high to be from the ground, too still to be anything moving. I stood up slowly and stepped closer. The glass felt cool when I put my hand against it. The light didn't flicker, didn't sway, didn't make any sound, just hovered there. I looked down, expecting to see some kind of vehicle or equipment below that might be casting it upward. There was nothing. The parking structure lights were dim and yellow. This was different, clean, pale, even. I glanced back at my dad, still asleep. The monitor kept its steady rhythm, beep, beep, beep. I looked back out the window. The light seemed closer, not by movement, just by presence. Like it was pressing into the space outside the glass. The edges of it weren't sharp. They blurred slightly into the darkness around it. For a second, I thought I saw something within it. Not a shape, just a distortion, like the air was bending inside the glow. I leaned closer to the window. My ears popped, sharp and sudden. I winced and swallowed, trying to clear it. The pressure stayed for a second, then settled. I became aware of the sound, or the lack of it. The monitor had stopped. I turned around. The screen was still on. Numbers frozen. No beeping. The air system hum had cut out too. The room felt sealed off. Heavy. I took a step back from the window. The light didn't change. It just stayed there, steady and silent. I looked at my dad again. He hadn't moved. His chest rose and fell slowly, but the monitor wasn't reflecting it anymore. I walked over to the machine and looked closer. The numbers were still. No fluctuation, no sound. I tapped the side of it lightly. Nothing. I felt a tightness in my chest. Not panic, just pressure. Like the air had thickened. I looked back at the window. The light pulsed slowly, brightened slightly, then dimmed. Like breathing. The pressure in my ears increased again. My fingertips tingled. I realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled slowly. The sound of it felt muted, like it wasn't fully reaching the room. I don't remember deciding to move closer again, but I did, step by step, back toward the window. The light seemed to fill more of my vision. The edges of the room softened. For a moment I thought I could see something just beyond it. Not clearly. Just the suggestion of depth, like looking through fog at something that didn't want to come into focus. The light pulsed again. My ears popped sharply. And then, everything came back, all at once. The monitor beeped loudly, making me flinch. The air system kicked in. Distant footsteps echoed in the hallway. I blinked. The light was gone. The window showed only the dark outside, the faint glow of distant streetlights. I stood there for a second, trying to catch up. The monitor next to my dad showed normal readings again. Numbers moving, beeping steady. I looked down at my phone. 2:54. I frowned. I was sure it had been just after 2:15 when I first noticed the light. There was no way that much time had passed. It hadn't felt like that. It had felt like minutes. I sat back down in the chair. My hands felt slightly numb. Not cold, just dull. I flexed my fingers, trying to shake it off. The room felt normal again, everything in its place. But I couldn't stop looking at the window. Every few seconds I'd glance back, half expecting the light to return. It didn't. Around 3:10, a nurse came in to check on my dad. She smiled, asked how he was doing. I almost said something about the monitor stopping, but I didn't. She would have seen it in the logs if something had actually happened. She adjusted a few things, checked his vitals, and left. Everything looked normal. Later, when I checked my phone again, I noticed something. My step counter, it logs movement automatically. There was a gap from 2:18 to 2:49, no movement recorded, just a flat line. But I knew I'd been standing, walking, moving around the room. I'd gone from the chair to the window to the bed, back again. Except according to that, I hadn't moved at all. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there, watching the window, waiting to see if the light would come back. It didn't. I got the taxi just after midnight outside a pub near the edge of town. It wasn't busy, just a couple of people hanging around waiting for rides and one car idling near the curb. The driver leaned over and unlocked the door when I approached. Older guy, maybe late 50s, didn't say much. Just nodded when I told him the address. I got in the back, shut the door, and the car pulled away almost immediately. It was a normal start. The radio was low, some talk show I wasn't really listening to. The heater was on, a bit too warm, and the windows had that faint fogging you get on cold nights. I sat back, looking out the side window as we drove. The streets were mostly empty. A few parked cars, the occasional light in a house window, nothing unusual. About 5 minutes in, I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was just another car behind us, a headlight catching in the reflection of the window. But it didn't behave like one. It stayed in the same position, not getting closer, not falling back, just there. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to get a better angle. The light was visible in the glass, hovering above and behind the car. Not directly behind like a vehicle, higher, like it was somewhere above the road, following along. I turned my head to look out the rear window. There was nothing there, just darkness and the faint glow of distant streetlights. I looked back at the side window. The reflection showed it clearly, a pale, steady light keeping pace with us. I frowned and leaned forward slightly. "Do you see that?" I asked. The driver didn't respond. I waited a second. "Behind us," I said, a bit louder. He glanced in the rearview mirror, then back at the road. "See what?" he said. "The light." He shook his head slightly. "Just your reflection, probably." I sat back, but it wasn't my reflection. It was too bright, too defined, and it didn't move when I moved. I watched it for a while. It stayed exactly where it was, hovering in the reflection, matching our speed perfectly. We passed a junction. Normally you'd see headlights shift, change angles, move relative to the car. This didn't. It stayed fixed. I looked out the window again, directly. Still nothing. Just the road, dark and empty. But in the glass, it was there, following. The air in the car felt off. Not immediately noticeable, but after a few minutes, I realized it felt thicker. The heater was still on, but the warmth felt muted somehow. My ears popped. I swallowed, trying to clear it. The pressure stayed for a second, then eased slightly. I looked at the driver again. He seemed completely normal. Hands steady on the wheel, eyes on the road, posture relaxed. The radio had gone quiet. I hadn't noticed when. No static, no voice, just silence. I leaned forward and looked at the dashboard. Everything seemed normal. Speed steady, no warning lights, but the interior lights looked dimmer. Not off, just reduced, like the brightness had been turned down without actually changing anything. I leaned back again. The light in the reflection hadn't changed. It pulsed once, softly, barely noticeable. But enough. My fingers tingled slightly where they rested on my leg. I shifted them, rubbing them together. The feeling didn't go away. I looked back out the rear window again. Still nothing. No source. No explanation. I turned back to the side window. The light seemed closer now. Not physically, just more present. Like it was pressing into the space around the car. The edges of it looked strange. Not sharp, not blurred. More like the air around it was bending slightly. I blinked. The light dimmed slightly, then returned to its original level. My ears popped again. Sharper this time. The pressure built quickly, then held. I opened my mouth to say something to the driver. Nothing came out at first, then when it did, it sounded wrong. Flat. Like it wasn't carrying properly. The driver didn't react. The car kept moving. The road ahead looked normal, but it felt like we'd been driving longer than we should have. I checked my phone. No signal. The time read 12:51. That didn't seem right. I'd gotten in around 12:10. The drive should have been 15 minutes, maybe 20 at most. It hadn't felt that long. I looked back at the light. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not a shape, just a distortion, like something shifting behind it. Then it was gone. The light pulsed again, stronger this time. The pressure in my ears peaked. Then everything snapped back. The radio came on suddenly, loud enough to make me flinch. The interior lights brightened. The air felt normal again. I blinked. The reflection in the window showed nothing. No light, just the dark road behind us. I looked out the rear window again. Still nothing. The driver spoke for the first time in a while. "Nearly there," he said. His voice sounded normal, like nothing had happened. A minute later, we pulled up outside my house. The car stopped. I sat there for a second, trying to process it. Then I reached for my wallet. The fare meter caught my eye. I froze. The distance was wrong, way off. It showed nearly double what the route should have been. I looked at the time again, 1:26. I stared at it. There was no way the drive had taken that long. It hadn't felt like more than 20 minutes. I looked at the driver. He didn't seem concerned. Just waited, hand resting on the wheel. "Bit higher than usual," I said, nodding toward the meter. He shrugged. "That's what it says." I paid him. Didn't argue. Got out of the car. The night air felt sharp and normal. I stood there for a second, watching the taxi pull away. As it turned the corner, I looked at the rear window one last time. There was nothing following it. Just the car, disappearing down the street. I went inside, checked my phone again. The time hadn't changed. 1:27. I stood in the hallway for a while, trying to remember the drive, the turns we took, the roads we passed. But there were gaps, whole stretches I couldn't account for, like pieces had been skipped over. I haven't taken a taxi that late since, not on my own. I saw it because the light hit it just right. I was driving back from a late shift, taking a stretch of road I don't usually use. It cuts across open farmland, no street lights, just long, straight sections with nothing on either side except low fences and fields. It was around 2 a.m., cold, clear, no wind. The road was empty. I had the headlights on full beam, just letting them stretch out ahead. That's when I caught the reflection. At first, it was just a flicker, a quick glint somewhere above the road. I thought maybe it was a sign, something reflective catching the light at an odd angle. But it wasn't where a sign would be. It was too high. I slowed down a bit, easing off the accelerator. The reflection came again, sharper this time, a dull metallic sheen. Not bright like a mirror, more like something smooth that absorbed some of the light and reflected the rest. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. The road ahead was completely empty. No poles, no wires, nothing hanging above it, but the reflection was there. I saw it again, a brief flash, then nothing, then another, like something was shifting slightly, just enough for the headlights to catch it. I slowed down more, down to maybe 35. My grip on the wheel tightened without me realizing it. The reflection came again, longer this time. And I saw the shape, not clearly, just enough to tell it wasn't flat, it was curved, smooth, like the underside of something rounded. No edges I could define, no lights of its own, just that dull surface catching my headlights. I kept moving forward slowly. The angle changed, the reflection slid across it. For a second, the shape became more visible. It wasn't small, it stretched wider than the road. Not massive, but bigger than any drone, bigger than anything that should be just sitting there. And it wasn't moving, it just hung there, perfectly still. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just the sense that what I was looking at didn't make sense. I rolled the window down slightly. Cold air rushed in, no sound, no engine noise from above, no wind disturbance, nothing. Just silence. I looked back up. The reflection came again. This time it revealed more of the curve like a shallow arc, smooth all the way across. No seams, no structure I could recognize. Then it tilted, just slightly. A small rotation. Enough that the reflection shifted across it. And then it was gone. Not like it moved away, not like it drifted or sped off. It just went straight up. Instantly. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. No blur, no trail, no sound. Just empty sky. I flinched and hit the brake harder than I meant to. The car slowed quickly. I came almost to a stop in the middle of the road. I stared up through the windshield. Nothing. Just stars. I opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit me harder outside. The air felt still, too still. I looked up again, turning slowly, trying to find any trace of it. Nothing. No movement. No light. No sign anything had been there. I listened. No sound. Even the usual background noise felt absent, like everything had been muted. I stood there for maybe half a minute, just staring at the sky, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I got back into the car and shut the door. The inside felt quieter than before, like the sound hadn't fully returned yet. I looked at the dashboard. Everything normal. No warnings. I checked the time. It didn't match. I'd glanced at it a few minutes before. It had been 2:07. Now it read 2:21. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been stopped that long. I tried to think back. The reflection, the shape, the tilt. It had taken seconds, not minutes. I sat there for a moment longer. Then I started driving again. Slow at first, then gradually picking up speed. The road ahead looked normal. No reflections, no shapes. Just empty. I kept glancing up through the windshield. Nothing. No sign of anything above me. The rest of the drive was uneventful. No more strange lights. No missing time I could notice. Just the usual road. When I got home, I parked in the driveway and sat there with the engine running. I adjusted the rearview mirror without thinking. It felt slightly off, like it wasn't quite aligned the way it should be. I fixed it, or tried to, but it never felt exactly right. I turned the engine off and got out. The air felt normal again. The quiet sounded normal. I looked up one last time. Nothing. Just the night sky. But the image of that shape stayed with me, the way it didn't move like anything I knew, and how it didn't leave. It just stopped being there, like it had only existed while my headlights were on it. I only saw it because the angle lined up for a second. I was driving back from my sister's place, taking a back road I don't usually use. It cuts through open countryside, no streetlights, just hedges and the occasional gate or field entrance. It was late. Around 1 a.m., the road was empty. No cars behind me, none ahead, just my headlights and the narrow stretch of road. I'd been driving for maybe 10 minutes when something flashed in front of me, not on the road. Above it. At first I thought it was a reflection from something on the side. A sign maybe, but it didn't feel right. The reflection was too brief, too clean. I slowed down slightly, trying to focus on where it had come from. Nothing. Just darkness ahead. Then it happened again. A quick glint. Higher this time, or maybe I just caught it better. I leaned forward a bit, eyes fixed on the space ahead. The road curved gently to the right. My headlights swept across the bend, and there it was. For a second I saw it clearly. A surface. Smooth. Curved, catching the light at just the right angle. It wasn't large, but it wasn't small either. Bigger than anything that should be suspended above a road like that. I eased off the accelerator. The reflection slid across it as I moved, revealing more of the shape. It didn't have sharp edges, more like a shallow curve, like the underside of something rounded. The surface wasn't shiny, it reflected the light in a dull way, like brushed metal. I rolled the window down slightly. Cold air rushed in, no sound, no hum, nothing to suggest anything was there. I kept driving forward slowly. The reflection came again, stronger. The shape became clearer for a moment, floating, not attached to anything. No cables, no supports, just there. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just confusion. I tried to judge the height. It was well above the road, higher than a truck, higher than anything that should be there. The reflection shifted again, then it tilted. Just slightly, a small rotation, enough to change how the light hit it. And then it was gone. Not drifting, not speeding off. It shot straight upward. Instantly. No buildup, no acceleration curve, just one position, then nothing. I flinched and hit the brake harder than I meant to. The car slowed quickly. I came almost to a stop in the middle of the road. I stared up through the windshield. Nothing, just the dark sky. I opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit me immediately. The air felt still, too still. I looked up again, turning slowly, trying to find any trace of it. Nothing. No movement, no light, no sound. I listened. No wind, no distant cars, just silence. I stood there for maybe half a minute, waiting. Nothing came back. I got back into the car and shut the door. The inside felt quieter than before, like the sound hadn't fully returned yet. I looked at the dashboard. Everything normal, no warnings. I checked the time. It didn't match. I'd glanced at it not long before. It had been around 1:14. Now it read 1:29. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been stopped that long. I tried to think back. The reflection, the shape, the tilt. It had taken seconds, not minutes. I sat there for a moment longer. Then I started driving again, slow at first, then gradually picking up speed. The road ahead looked normal. No reflections, no shapes, just empty. I kept glancing up through the windshield. Nothing. No sign of anything above me. The rest of the drive passed without anything unusual. When I got home, I parked and sat there with the engine off, looking out at the street. Everything felt normal again. The quiet sounded right. But the way that surface had moved, it hadn't accelerated, it hadn't built speed, it had just changed position. Like it wasn't moving through the air at all, just leaving it. I noticed it because I thought a car was passing outside. You know how headlights sometimes catch the edges of your room through the curtains and move across the ceiling? That's what it felt like at first. I was lying on my back, not fully asleep yet, just staring at the ceiling, half thinking about the day, half drifting off. The room was dark, curtains closed, no lights on. Then something shifted above me, faint, barely there. I assumed it was just light from outside. But it didn't move the way headlights usually do. It didn't sweep across in one smooth motion. It moved slower, more deliberate. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus. That's when I realized it wasn't a solid light. It was a pattern. Very faint, like a grid, thin lines crossing each other, forming small squares. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks. The pattern stayed. It drifted slowly across the ceiling, not from one side of the room to the other, just moving, as if it wasn't tied to any direction. I stayed still, watching it. The lines weren't bright, just slightly lighter than the darkness around them. Enough to see, not enough to illuminate anything. I lifted my head slightly, trying to get a better angle. The moment I focused directly on it, it became harder to see, like it slipped just out of clarity. I relaxed my eyes, looked slightly to the side. It came back. The grid was still there, still moving, slow, steady. I felt that quiet tension settle in. Not fear, just something not making sense. I turned my head slightly toward the window. The curtains hadn't moved. No light was coming through. I looked back up. The grid continued its slow drift. I couldn't tell where it started or ended. It didn't reach the walls, just existed across the center of the ceiling, like it was projected there, but softer, less defined. I listened. No sound. The room felt quieter than it should have. Even my breathing sounded dull. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, turned the screen on. The light from it filled the room. I looked back at the ceiling. Nothing, just plain darkness. I turned the phone off. The room dropped back into shadow. The grid returned, exactly where it had been, still moving. I sat up slightly, propped myself on one elbow, watching it. The movement didn't change. It didn't react to me. It just kept drifting. I checked the time on my phone again. 1:19. That felt right, maybe. I wasn't sure. I looked back up. The grid slowed, almost stopped. The lines became fainter. I squinted, trying to hold on to it, to see it properly. The moment I focused harder, it faded. Not quickly, just gradually, like it was slipping away. The lines thinned, the squares broke apart. Then it was gone. The ceiling was just dark again. I lay there for a few seconds, waiting. Nothing came back. I turned my head toward the window again, still closed. No movement. I sat up fully this time, swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floor felt normal, cool, solid. I stood up and looked around the room. Everything looked the same, nothing out of place. I reached up and touched the ceiling above where the pattern had been. Nothing, just the usual texture. I went back to bed and lay down again, stared at the ceiling. Nothing, just darkness. I checked my phone one more time, 1:47. That didn't make sense. I was sure only a few minutes had passed. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I turned the phone off again. The room went dark. I stared up, half expecting the grid to come back. It didn't. The ceiling stayed empty. Eventually, I closed my eyes, tried to sleep, but every now and then I'd open them again, just to check. Nothing. Just darkness. But the way the pattern had moved, not like light, not like reflection, felt like it hadn't been on the ceiling at all. More like it had been between me and it.